What would you do if your family left you behind for a vacation and didn't even tell you why? I stared at the back of the van, the tires crunching against the gravel driveway as my mom, stepdad, and siblings loaded up the car. They were going on vacation. Without me. No one had told me about the trip, not even a heads up. It wasn't until they were practically on their way that my mom casually mentioned it, like it was just another day. We're leaving tomorrow, Em. Don't forget to feed the cat. I felt my heart drop into my stomach as I stood frozen in the living room. I blinked, hoping I had somehow misunderstood. But the look on her face told me everything. She wasn't kidding. My stepdad, Steve, was already buckled up in the front seat, tapping his fingers on the dashboard like this was just another routine trip. Jack and Lily, my younger siblings, were bouncing around in the back, their excitement evident. What do you mean we're leaving? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. What about me? My mom looked at me like she didn't quite understand the question. Oh, sweetie, you're staying here. You said you didn't want to go on vacation, remember? I shook my head, confusion flooding my mind. No, I had never said that. Never. We hadn't even talked about it. My mom and stepdad had been planning this trip in the background, and not once had anyone asked if I wanted to come. Not even a hey, would you like to join us? It wasn't like I had expected to be the star of the trip or anything. I wasn't a kid anymore, at least. I didn't think I was. But I hadn't imagined that my mom would go so far as to leave me behind. This was the family I had been living with for the past few years, and now, suddenly, I was being left out of the picture entirely. I could feel my cheeks burning, and I fought back the rush of tears that threatened to spill over. I had never felt so abandoned. I looked at my mom for some kind of explanation, but she just stood there, wringing her hands in that way she did when she was nervous. Steve glanced back at me from the driver's seat. It's just a quick trip, he said in that tone of his, the one that always made me feel like I was the one overreacting. You'll be fine. Fine. Fine? Was I supposed to be fine with this? Why wasn't I invited? My voice cracked before I could stop it. Why didn't you even ask me? My mom opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. It was like she was trying to find the right words, but couldn't. Finally, she sighed, looking over at Steve for reassurance. We just thought you'd rather stay home. You've been busy with school, and we didn't want to stress you out with a vacation right now. It's not a big deal, okay? Not a big deal? How could she say that? I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. I wanted to yell, to tell her how hurt I was, but I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Okay, I finally said, my voice low. Have fun. I turned around and walked back into the house, the sound of the van pulling out of the driveway echoing in my ears. I couldn't believe it. I had spent all these years trying to make this family work, trying to make myself feel at home, and this was how they treated me? I stood in the hallway, staring at the front door as if I could somehow stop it from happening. But the van was already out of sight. And then came the silence. It was like the house had suddenly grown empty. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, but nothing else. No laughter. No voices. No footsteps. Just me. Alone. I knew, deep down, this wasn't just about the vacation. This was about something deeper. Something more complicated. My mind raced as I sat down on the couch, trying to make sense of everything. Was it that I wasn't good enough to be included? Was I always going to be on the outside of this family, never truly fitting in? I couldn't help but think about the years Steve had been in my life. He'd come into our world after my dad left when I was younger. I had never felt close to him, and honestly, I wasn't sure I ever would. He was always the outsider in my eyes. He and my mom had tried to make it work, sure, but the cracks were always there. I'd seen it in the way Steve treated me, like I was a distant relative, not a daughter. I had always tried to make an effort to reach out, but it felt like I was invisible to him. Maybe this was just a reflection of that. Maybe it wasn't about me not wanting to go on the vacation. Maybe it was about the fact that no one really wanted me there. And, for some reason, that hurt more than anything. I grabbed my phone, scrolling aimlessly through my social media feed, looking for anything that could distract me from the gnawing emptiness in my chest. But all I could think about was them, their laughter, their jokes, their excitement, and how I wasn't a part of it. I glanced at the clock. They'd be gone for a week. A full week. I'd have the house to myself, and yet I didn't feel free. I felt trapped. What was I supposed to do with myself now? I didn't know what hurt more, the fact that they left me behind or the fact that they didn't even think to ask me to come along in the first place. And then, a thought struck me. Maybe I could make the most of this. Maybe I could take the week to figure things out, to spend time focusing on myself. I had always put my energy into trying to belong in this family, but maybe now is the time to stop trying to fit into someone else's world and start building my own. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play here. Why had they left me out? And what did it mean about me? I sighed, standing up from the couch and walking over to the window. The driveway was empty now. The house was empty. It was just me. I turned away from the window, my heart heavy with confusion. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with the next week, but I knew one thing. This vacation was going to change everything. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Emily's life had always been a puzzle. A mix of broken pieces from her past, stitched together in an imperfect, sometimes painful way. She wasn't sure when it started, but she knew it hadn't been easy. Her dad, her real dad, left when she was just 6 years old. He didn't even say goodbye. One day, he packed his bags and disappeared, leaving behind a trail of questions and a broken family. Emily's mom, Sarah, never really talked about it. She would say little things like, "Your dad had his own battles," or "Some people just aren't meant to stay in our lives." But Emily knew. Her dad had walked out, and no one had been there to explain why. For a long time, it was just her and her mom. Sarah did the best she could, raising Emily on her own, but there was always something missing. Emily had felt it growing up. Her mom worked long hours at a local bakery to make ends meet, so Emily often found herself alone. It wasn't the kind of loneliness that came from having no one around. It was the kind that came from not having someone who could make things better when the world felt too heavy. And then came Steve. When Emily was 12, her mom started dating Steve. He was tall, with a firm handshake and a confident smile. Emily didn't like him from the start. There was something about him that made her uneasy. He was always so perfect, like he had his life together in a way that Emily couldn't comprehend. Her mom seemed happy, though. She smiled more when Steve was around, laughed more easily, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't seem so exhausted. But Emily wasn't so sure. She wasn't ready for someone else to take her dad's place, and Steve, no matter how kind or well-meaning he was, could never fill that hole. Over the next few years, Emily watched as Steve became a more permanent fixture in their lives. First, they moved in together. Then, a few months later, Steve asked her mom to marry him. And just like that, Emily was expected to accept him as part of the family. The wedding was small, quiet, and held at a local park. Emily had worn a yellow dress that her mom picked out for her, though she hated it. At first, it wasn't terrible. Steve tried, in his own way, to be a good stepdad. He took Emily to movies on weekends, tried to help with her homework, even though he was terrible at it, and even made an effort to bond with her through video games. But there was always that distance between them. No matter how much he tried, no matter how many dinners they had together, Emily couldn't bring herself to see him as family. He wasn't her dad. In a way, she envied him. Steve didn't have to go through what she did. He wasn't the one who had to fill the emptiness her dad left behind. He didn't have the weight of those unanswered questions or the sting of betrayal. He could move on easily, like nothing ever happened. But Emily? She was stuck. She couldn't forget how everything had been before Steve, couldn't forget the life she'd had with her real dad. Steve would never be able to replace that. And now, after years of trying to make things work, after years of trying to get along, Emily felt like she was still stuck in the same place. Watching her mom and Steve grow closer while she stayed on the outside. Watching Jack and Lily bond with their new stepdad, laughing and playing while she stood on the sidelines, wishing things could be different. Wishing she could finally feel like she belonged. But here they were again. Another family moment. Another vacation, and Emily, once again, left behind. Her mom had tried, at least. She really had. Sarah never wanted Emily to feel like an outsider. But she didn't always know how to fix the gap between her daughter and her new husband. Maybe, somewhere deep down, she hoped that time would heal it, that eventually, Emily would come to accept Steve as family. But Emily never had, and now, after all these years, it seemed like she never would. The truth was, Sarah had always been caught in the middle. She wanted Emily to accept Steve, but she also wanted to protect her from the hurt of her father's abandonment. And now, with this vacation, it felt like a decision had been made for her, by Steve, by everyone else, but not by Emily. She was once again expected to just accept things as they were, without being asked how she felt. As Emily thought about all this, her anger began to rise again. Why had no one asked her? Why had no one bothered to involve her in the conversation? It felt like a betrayal, like they were telling her that she didn't matter. That her place in this family was secondary to everything else. The thought gnawed at her. She wasn't sure where this would all lead, but she knew something had to change. She had to figure out what her place in this family really was, or if she even had one. Emily went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water, pacing back and forth in the quiet of the house. The faint sound of the clock ticking in the living room felt louder than ever. She thought about texting Mia, her best friend, but she didn't know what to say. How could she explain all of this? How could she explain the deep, hollow feeling that seemed to grow every time she looked at her mom and stepdad together? Emily stared out the window as the sun began to set, casting a soft, golden glow over the empty driveway. She was alone. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was completely invisible. Her family was out there somewhere, having fun without her. And all she could do was stay behind, waiting for answers that she wasn't sure would ever come. The silence of the house felt like a weight pressing down on Emily's chest. She had never felt more alone than she did right now. The place where her family had once been, the laughter and noise that used to fill the air, was now hollow and empty. All of them had gone on vacation without her, leaving nothing behind but their absence. It was a strange feeling to be left behind. She hadn't expected to feel so abandoned. She had always known, deep down, that things with her stepdad weren't perfect, but this felt different. It wasn't just the fact that she wasn't invited, it was the way it had all happened. The casual nature of it, the assumption that she wouldn't mind being left behind. And it wasn't like she had anywhere else to go. She had friends, but none of them lived close enough to make hanging out a regular thing. She couldn't just drop everything and take a trip with them. She had nowhere to escape to, no one to turn to accept herself. As the days wore on, the quiet grew louder. Emily spent her time walking around the house aimlessly, cleaning up the messes no one else seemed to notice, trying to find something to occupy her mind. The food in the fridge seemed tasteless, the TV shows dull and lifeless. Even the books on her shelf couldn't hold her attention. It was like everything she did felt disconnected, unreal, like she was stuck in a life that wasn't really hers. Her phone buzzed one afternoon. It was a message from Mia. "Mia, so how's the vacation? Having fun without us?" Emily stared at the message for a long moment before typing a response. Her fingers hovered over the screen, unsure of how to explain. How could she possibly explain what was really going on? How could she tell her best friend that her family had gone on vacation without her, like she wasn't even a part of the equation. Emily, they didn't take me. They left without me. The text was blunt, and for a moment, she regretted sending it. What would Mia think? Would she think Emily was overreacting? But before she could delete the message, Mia responded almost immediately. Mia, what? That's messed up. Are you okay? Emily took a deep breath before replying. Emily, I don't know. I just feel invisible. Like they didn't even think to ask me. Like they just assumed I wouldn't want to go, or that I didn't matter enough to even ask. I don't know what to do. She sat down on the couch, looking out the window at the empty driveway again, the emptiness of the house weighing heavily on her. Mia's reply came quickly. Mia, that's honestly heartbreaking. I don't know what they're thinking, but you deserve better than that. You're part of the family, too. I'm sorry you're going through this, but you know you've got me, right? If you need to talk or hang out, I'm here. Emily smiled faintly at her friend's words, but it didn't erase the feeling of abandonment. Mia was right, of course. She had her, but there was a difference between a friend and family. Mia couldn't fill the emptiness she felt every time she walked into the house and saw her mom's empty chair at the dinner table, or every time she looked at her phone and realized that no one was texting her to check in. The more Emily thought about it, the more the anger bubbled up inside of her. She wanted to scream, to confront her mom, to demand an explanation. Why hadn't they even asked her if she wanted to come? Why had they assumed she wouldn't care? But then she realized something. It wasn't just about the vacation. It was about everything that had led up to this moment. Her entire life had felt like an afterthought. Since her dad left, she had been struggling to find her place in a family that was never quite hers. She didn't fit into Steve's world, and she didn't fit into her mom's vision of the perfect family. It had always been her and her mom trying to figure things out, and now it was Steve's world. She was just the outsider. But there was something else too. Something even deeper. Emily had never allowed herself to be vulnerable enough to truly open up, to admit that it hurt, to admit that the reason she resented Steve wasn't just because he replaced her dad, but because he made her feel like she didn't matter. And for years, she had buried that hurt, trying to make things work, trying to convince herself that it was all going to be okay. But now it felt like all the anger she had bottled up was spilling over. She had been holding it in for so long, and this vacation was the last straw. Her family had gone off without her, leaving her behind like she was nothing more than an inconvenience. Emily stood up from the couch, walking over to the kitchen. She grabbed a glass from the cabinet and filled it with water, her movements automatic. She didn't know what to do next. Should she confront her mom? Should she talk to Steve? Should she just leave for a few days and go visit Mia like she had wanted to in the past? As she stared down at the glass in her hand, she felt the weight of her choices press down on her. No matter what she did, the distance between her and her family had grown too wide to fix with a simple conversation. Something had to change. She couldn't keep living in this limbo, stuck between the past and the present. But the question was, how? Her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her mom. Mom, hey, sweetie. Just wanted to check in. We're having a great time here. I hope you're doing okay. Let me know if you need anything. We'll be back in a few days. Love you. Emily stared at the text for a moment, the words feeling distant and hollow. Her mom was so happy with Steve and the kids, and here Emily was, alone in a house that didn't feel like home anymore. She didn't respond. Instead, she set the phone down and walked outside, stepping into the yard. The air was cool, and the sky was painted with the colors of dusk. For the first time in days, Emily felt the need to breathe, to step away from the suffocating silence. The world was bigger than her family's drama. She knew that. But it was hard to remember that when it felt like her entire life had been shaped by it. And yet, deep down, she felt a strange flicker of hope. Maybe this vacation, this time alone, could be the catalyst for something new. Maybe it was time to face the truth about what was happening in her family and finally start moving forward. It was going to be a long week. But maybe, just maybe, it would be the beginning of something different. The days stretched on, each one feeling like it was stuck in slow motion. Emily found herself counting the minutes until her family would return. Part of her was just hoping for the chance to yell at her mom, to tell her how much this whole situation had hurt her, but another part of her felt a strange sense of relief. With no one around, she could think, and she could breathe without anyone telling her what she was supposed to do or feel. It wasn't the way she wanted to feel alone and disconnected, but it was how she felt, and there was no escaping it. She didn't have to pretend. One afternoon, after another uneventful day of pacing the house and avoiding the phone, Emily decided to go for a walk. She hadn't left the house much since her family had gone, not that she had anywhere to go. But something about being outdoors, surrounded by the quiet hum of the neighborhood, made her feel like she could clear her head for a bit. The weather was perfect, the sun dipping low in the sky, casting golden light over everything. Emily walked through the quiet streets, her mind racing with the same questions over and over again. Why didn't they take her? Was she not enough for them? What had she done to deserve being left behind? As she wandered, she passed the park where she used to hang out with Mia. The swings were empty now, but the memory of sitting on them, talking about everything and nothing, flooded back. She missed those simple days when things were less complicated. But that was before Steve. Before everything started to feel like it was being rearranged and redefined in ways she didn't understand. Before she began to feel invisible in her own life. She didn't realize she had walked so far until she found herself standing in front of a small coffee shop. The sign outside read "The Corner Brew," and Emily remembered how her mom and Steve had come here on one of their first dates. They had laughed about the clumsy barista who spilled coffee all over Steve's lap. It was one of those memories that should have been funny, but to Emily, it felt more like a reminder of everything that had changed, everything she had lost. But something caught her eye as she stood there, staring at the shop. Through the window, she saw her mom and Steve sitting at a table, laughing together. They were in their own world, talking about something that seemed important to them, but completely irrelevant to Emily. It stung to see them so happy, so carefree, while she was here, stuck in this house, isolated and unwanted. The sight of them made her stomach churn. It wasn't just jealousy, though that was definitely part of it. It was the growing realization that she was no longer a priority in her mom's life. It had taken her this long to admit it, but it was true. Feeling the sharp pang of betrayal, Emily turned away from the shop and headed home, her mind whirling. She hadn't expected to see them, not like this. And yet, there they were, existing in their own bubble while she was left outside of it, watching from the sidelines. She couldn't go back to the way things were. She couldn't pretend everything was fine, because it wasn't. That night, after another quiet dinner alone, Emily sat in the living room, staring at her phone. It was after midnight, and her family still hadn't called. She'd been hoping for at least a text, a quick check-in, something to let her know they hadn't forgotten her. But nothing. It felt like a slap in the face. Just as she was about to put her phone down, the doorbell rang. Emily froze. She wasn't expecting anyone, but the sound echoed through the house, breaking the silence. She walked cautiously to the door and peeked through the peephole. A figure stood on the other side, their face hidden in shadow. Who could it be at this hour? With a mix of curiosity and hesitation, Emily opened the door. Standing there was Steve. His eyes looked tired, like he'd been running on fumes for days. He was holding a small suitcase in one hand, his other hand shoved in his pocket. "Steve?" Emily asked, her voice tentative. "What are you doing here?" He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his presence filling the doorway. "Can we talk?" Her heart skipped a beat. What was this about? Was he coming here to apologize for leaving her behind? Was this his attempt to make things right? Before she could ask, he spoke again. I know things haven't been easy between us, but there's something I need to tell you. Something important. Emily's mind raced. Was he about to finally admit that he had been wrong? That he had treated her like an outsider for too long? Okay, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. What's going on? Steve hesitated, and then, with a deep breath, he dropped the bombshell. I didn't want to go on the vacation either, he said quietly. I wasn't sure if I was welcome. I felt like maybe, just maybe, you didn't want me there. Emily blinked in disbelief. She shook her head. What? But you didn't even ask me. You didn't give me a choice. You just assumed I wouldn't care. Steve looked at her, his expression sincere. I know. And I was wrong. I should have talked to you, but I didn't. I made assumptions, and I'm sorry for that. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. Emily stood frozen, not sure how to react. This wasn't the conversation she had imagined. She had expected an apology, yes, but she hadn't expected him to admit that he had his own doubts about her, about their relationship, about everything that had happened. And then, as if he had read her mind, he added, the truth is, I've been struggling too. It's not just you. I've felt like I don't belong in this family either, but I've never known how to say it. For the first time, Emily saw Steve in a different light. He wasn't just the guy who was trying too hard to be her stepdad. He was a man who had his own doubts and insecurities, who was just as lost as she felt. The weight of the moment settled over both of them. Emily didn't know what to say. She didn't know if she could forgive him just yet, but she could see that he was trying in his own way. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start. The room was heavy with silence after Steve's confession. Emily stood there, trying to process everything he had said. Her mind was racing, a whirlwind of emotions swirling around inside her. Was this real? Had Steve really just admitted that he was struggling too? Could it be that he was trying, in his own clumsy way, to reach out to her? For a moment, Emily wasn't sure how to react. She had spent so much time feeling hurt, angry, and abandoned. She had convinced herself that Steve was the problem, that he was the reason everything in their family felt so broken. But now, hearing him speak so openly about his own doubts and insecurities, something inside of her shifted. She swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. You never told me, she finally said, her voice shaky. You never told me how you were feeling. You just assumed I would be fine and that I didn't matter. Steve sighed, running a hand through his hair, looking frustrated with himself. I know. I've been bad about communicating. I've been trying to make this family work, but I didn't stop to think how my actions were affecting you. I was so focused on making sure everything was okay with your mom and me that I forgot about you. I'm sorry, Emily. Emily looked at him, unsure of how to respond. The apology sounded sincere, but was it too little, too late? Could this conversation fix everything that had been building up over the years? She wasn't sure. Part of her wanted to shout, to tell him how hurt she had been. Part of her wanted to break down in tears and tell him everything she had been holding in for so long. But another part of her just felt numb. Why didn't you ask me? She asked quietly, staring at the ground. Why didn't you even ask if I wanted to go on the vacation? You could have talked to me. Steve hesitated. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought if I just left you at home, you'd have some space. Maybe you didn't want to be around me or my kids. I didn't want to force anything. But I was wrong. I should have included you, and I should have talked to you about it. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. It wasn't just an apology. It was an admission of his own failure to understand her needs, to see her as part of the family in the way he should have from the beginning. Emily had always felt like an outsider, but maybe, just maybe, Steve was acknowledging that he hadn't been a true part of her life either. But as much as Emily wanted to accept his apology and move forward, something still gnawed at her. She had been left behind. And it wasn't just about the vacation, it was about years of feeling invisible. It was about the constant battle of trying to find her place in a family that never quite seemed to fit together. "Steve," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "I've tried to be okay with everything. I've tried to make it work, but I've felt so left out. Like I don't matter in this family. Like I'm just an extra piece that doesn't fit in." She could see Steve's expression change as she spoke. He looked genuinely shocked, as though he hadn't realized just how deeply she had been affected by all of this. "Emily, I never meant for you to feel that way," he said softly. "I truly didn't. But I understand now that I haven't been a good stepdad to you. I've treated you like you were just some afterthought. And for that, I am so sorry." It was the first time Steve had ever truly acknowledged the way he had made her feel, and for a brief moment, Emily's heart softened. It wasn't the answer she had been hoping for all along, but it was the beginning of something. She couldn't erase the past, and she couldn't change everything that had already happened, but maybe they could start fresh. Maybe they could try to build something new, something real. "But I still don't understand why you didn't take me on the vacation," Emily said, the hurt still raw in her voice. "Why did you think I wouldn't want to go? Why didn't you at least ask me? It felt like you didn't care about me enough to even try." Steve looked down, his face etched with guilt. "I didn't want to make things awkward. I didn't want you to feel like you had to go if you didn't want to. I thought I was giving you space. But I see now how wrong I was." Emily stared at him, her chest tight with emotion. "You never even asked me what I wanted. You just assumed. You never made me feel like I had a place." Steve reached out tentatively, as if trying to bridge the gap between them, but Emily stepped back, unsure of how to handle it. She wasn't ready for that kind of closeness, not yet. Maybe in time, but not right now. I know, he said, his voice soft. "I've been selfish. And I've let my own fears and insecurities affect the way I've treated you. But I want to make it right, Em. I want to try, even if it's hard." Emily exhaled sharply, trying to process it all. She had so many emotions swirling inside her: anger, hurt, confusion, and even a flicker of hope. But she wasn't sure if she could just forgive him in an instant. It was going to take time. And they both had a long way to go. "You can't just fix this with an apology, Steve," she said quietly, her voice tinged with sadness. "It's going to take more than that." Steve nodded. "I know. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I just need you to know that I'm here, and I'm not giving up on us. Not on you." For a moment, Emily just stood there, absorbing his words. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the fairy tale resolution she had always dreamed of, but it was something. And maybe, for now, that was enough. "I don't know what I want right now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But maybe we can start by trying to talk. Really talk. Without assumptions." Steve's face softened, and for the first time, Emily saw a glimpse of the person he could be, someone willing to change, someone willing to try. "I can do that," he said gently. "I promise." Emily didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like there might be a way forward. It wouldn't be easy, but maybe they could find a way to rebuild, piece by piece. One conversation at a time. And maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something new. The next few days felt like a blur. Emily didn't know how to process what had happened with Steve. Part of her was still angry, hurt by the way everything had unfolded. But another part of her, the part that longed for connection, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could work through their issues. It was strange, though. The idea of trying to rebuild a relationship with Steve, someone who had been an outsider for so long, felt almost impossible. She had spent years keeping her distance, keeping her emotions guarded. Now, after his unexpected confession, everything felt like it was up in the air. Nothing was certain anymore. Her mom was still away on vacation, and Emily had decided not to tell her about Steve's visit. Not yet. She wasn't sure what to say. Part of her wanted to tell her mom everything, to finally confront her about how things had felt, how they had been unraveling for months. But another part of her wasn't ready. She wasn't sure if she was strong enough to have that conversation. Not yet. That evening, as Emily sat on the couch in the living room, staring at the blank television screen, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She picked it up, expecting a text from Mia, but instead, it was a message from Steve. "Hey, Emily. I know it's been a little awkward, but I just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" The words were simple, but they made her feel a strange mix of emotions. It wasn't a grand gesture, not a deep apology or a promise to change overnight. It was just a message, a small attempt at connection. Emily stared at the screen for a long moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She wasn't sure what to say. She didn't want to open up too much, not yet. But she didn't want to shut him out completely either. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of indecision, she typed back, "I'm okay. Still figuring things out, I guess." She hit send and set the phone down, feeling both relieved and unsettled. She wasn't ready to dive into a deep conversation, but it felt like a step, however small. A bridge, fragile and tentative, beginning to form between them. The next few days passed in much the same way. Emily tried to keep her distance, focusing on schoolwork and spending time alone. But Steve's texts became more frequent. At first, they were simple check-ins, small updates about his day, or a comment about something he thought she might be interested in. Slowly, though, the conversations began to evolve. They started talking about things beyond the surface, the weather, the news, even her favorite books. It wasn't deep, but it was progress. It was a way for them to connect, however fragile that connection might be. Still, there was a part of Emily that couldn't fully relax. The idea of trusting Steve again felt foreign, almost impossible. And every time she allowed herself to think that maybe things could improve, the hurt would bubble to the surface again. The vacation. The years of feeling invisible. The constant disappointment of never being fully seen. But there was something else too. A spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, Steve was trying. And that, more than anything, was the hardest part to admit to herself. He was trying. And that made her want to try too. It was late one night, as Emily was lying in bed, the glow of her phone screen illuminating the dark room, that another text from Steve came through. "Hey, I was thinking, maybe we could grab some coffee when you're free? Just the two of us. No pressure, just to talk." Emily sat up in bed, her heart racing. Coffee? Was he serious? A one-on-one conversation with Steve? The idea of it made her nervous, but at the same time, it felt like a chance. A chance to really talk, to get past the surface-level exchanges they'd been having, to try to understand each other better. But a wave of doubt quickly followed. Was this too soon? Was she ready for it? Could she really sit across from him, face to face, after everything that had happened? She stared at the message for a long time, her mind torn in two. Part of her wanted to shut down the idea completely, to keep running from the uncomfortable conversation that was inevitable. But another part of her, the part that wanted things to improve, knew this could be the moment that defined where they would go from here. She sighed, typing a quick reply. "Yeah, okay. We can do that." It wasn't a resounding yes, but it was a step. A fragile bridge. The next morning, Emily met Steve at the small coffee shop near her house. The same one her mom and Steve had visited so many times before. The place had an old-fashioned charm, with mismatched chairs and soft jazz music playing in the background. Emily had never been here alone before. It had always been a place where things felt a little out of reach, a little too perfect for someone like her. But today was different. She spotted Steve immediately, sitting at a small table near the window. He looked up as she walked in, his expression softening when he saw her. His eyes were a little tired, but there was something genuine about his smile that made Emily pause for a moment. "Hey," he greeted her, his voice warm. "Thanks for meeting me." She nodded, sliding into the chair across from him. Her hands instinctively folded in her lap, the nervous energy making her feel a little stiff. But Steve didn't seem to mind. He just sat there, waiting for her to speak, as if giving her space to breathe. "Thanks for asking," Emily said after a moment. She wasn't sure what to say next, but somehow the words came more easily than she had expected. "I wasn't sure if I was ready for this, but I think I am." Steve nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I get that. I've been trying to figure out how to do this right. But I don't know if I can, not all at once. I just want you to know that I'm here. And I'm listening." For the first time in a long time, Emily felt something stir in her chest. Maybe it was the warmth of the coffee shop, or maybe it was just the quiet honesty between them. But for the first time, it felt like Steve was really there, really trying to meet her halfway. And for the first time in a long time, Emily allowed herself to believe that this could be the beginning of something new. The next few weeks after the coffee meeting felt like a slow unraveling. The conversations with Steve had become more frequent, but there was still a strange tension between them. Emily didn't quite know how to navigate this new dynamic. It was as if they were both standing on the edge of something important, yet neither of them dared to take the next step. They were talking more, yes, but the real barriers, the things they had been avoiding for years, still loomed large. Emily tried to push the doubts aside. She kept telling herself that progress was progress, no matter how small. Steve was trying, and for the first time, she was willing to let him in. But she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was still missing. The hurt was still there, buried beneath the surface, waiting to resurface at the slightest provocation. One evening, Emily sat in her room, absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone. There was a message from Steve, as usual. She hesitated for a moment before opening it. "Hey, I was thinking, maybe we could go for a walk this weekend? Just to talk. No pressure, just wanted to spend some time together." The invitation felt casual enough, but a ripple of unease ran through her. She stared at the screen, her mind racing. She hadn't realized how much she had been avoiding him, how much she had been holding back. The thought of spending more time with him, actually opening up and letting herself be vulnerable, terrified her. But she didn't want to keep running. Not forever. She typed back after a moment of hesitation. "Yeah, that sounds good. Let's do it." The response felt like a promise she wasn't entirely sure she was ready to keep. But at the same time, she was curious. Maybe this walk would be the moment when things shifted, when the wall she had built around herself would finally begin to crumble. Saturday afternoon arrived, and Emily met Steve at the local park, the one where she had spent so many afternoons as a child. The park had always been a safe place for her, a quiet refuge away from the chaos of life. It felt oddly fitting that they would meet here, as if it symbolized the possibility of a fresh start. Steve was already waiting by the entrance, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket. He looked slightly nervous, but there was something else in his expression too. A softness, maybe even a trace of vulnerability, that made Emily feel a little less apprehensive. "Hey," he greeted her, his voice gentle. "Thanks for agreeing to meet up." Emily smiled, trying to shake off the tension. "It's no problem." They started walking along the familiar path, the crunch of leaves beneath their feet the only sound between them. For a while, neither of them spoke. Emily wasn't sure what to say. She had a million thoughts racing through her mind, but none of them seemed to fit. Finally, Steve broke the silence. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About how I didn't include you in things, about how I made you feel invisible. And I'm sorry, Emily. I truly am. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you." The apology was familiar by now, but this time, it felt different. There was a sincerity in his voice, an openness that hadn't been there before. And as much as she wanted to dismiss it, to shut him down, Emily felt a flicker of something. Something like hope. "Thanks for saying that," she replied, her voice shaky. "It means a lot to me. But it's not just about being left out, Steve. It's about everything. It's about how I've felt, alone, Like I was just a burden in your life. Like I wasn't really part of the family. Steve's face tightened with guilt, his brow furrowing. I never meant for you to feel that way. I never wanted you to feel like a burden. I know, Emily said, though it was hard to believe it sometimes. But it felt like that. For a long time. You and my mom, you were always in your own world. And I was just there. The words came out before she could stop them. She hadn't meant to say it all at once, but it felt like the dam had finally broken. The hurt she had buried for so long came rushing to the surface, and she couldn't keep it in anymore. It wasn't just about the vacation or the awkward moments. It was about the years of feeling like she didn't matter. Like she was just the child who didn't fit into their perfect little family. Steve stopped walking, turning to face her. His expression was full of regret, and for a moment, he just looked at her, as if trying to find the right words. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost pleading. I can't change the past, Emily. I can't undo the mistakes I've made. But I need you to know that I never wanted you to feel that way. I love you, even if I haven't shown it the way I should have. Emily felt a lump form in her throat at his words. The confession caught her off guard, and for a brief moment, she didn't know how to respond. It wasn't the perfect apology, not the one she had dreamed of in her head. But it was real. And it was enough to make her pause, to make her reconsider everything she thought she knew about their relationship. I don't know if I can just forgive everything that quickly, Emily said, her voice trembling. It's been so much. It's been years of feeling alone. It's hard to just forget all of that. I don't expect you to forget, Steve said softly. I just want to try. I want to be there for you, if you'll let me. I want to be the stepdad you need, not the one I was before. For a long moment, Emily stood there, feeling the weight of his words settle on her chest. She wasn't sure what to make of them. Could she really let him back in? Could she trust him again after everything that had happened? But there was a flicker of something inside her, a spark of hope that hadn't been there before. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. Maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself to believe in the possibility of change. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. I'm willing to try, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Steve's eyes softened with relief, and he gave her a small smile. That's all I can ask for. As they continued walking, the path ahead felt uncertain. There was still so much left unsaid, so much to figure out. But for the first time in a long time, Emily felt like they were both on the same path, no longer strangers, but two people trying to find their way through the mess they had made. And maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild something real. The days following the walk with Steve were a mix of hope and uncertainty. Emily had never realized how much the tension had been affecting her until she felt the weight of it lift, just a little, after that conversation. She wasn't naive enough to believe that everything would magically fall into place. But there was a small shift in her heart, a glimmer of something better. Steve wasn't perfect. She knew that. He had made plenty of mistakes, some of which she would never be able to forgive fully. But the effort he was putting in, the openness he was showing her now, was different. He wasn't giving her empty words anymore. He was actively trying to understand her, to make things right. And that, in itself, was progress. As the week went on, their conversations became easier. Not effortless, but easier. Emily found herself replying to his texts more willingly, sharing little bits of her day, asking how his day had gone. They talked about everything and nothing at once. The weather, music, books they were reading, the latest episode of a show. It was a different kind of connection than what they had had before. It felt small, like a quiet foundation being built, but it was a start. But even as the walls between them began to crack, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Steve was trying, yes, but there was an underlying question that lingered at the back of her mind. Is it enough? The moment of reckoning was bound to come, and Emily knew it. The tension was always there, hovering just beneath the surface. Her mom would come back from her vacation soon. And that would be the real test. How much had changed since she had left? Would they be able to maintain this fragile connection, or would it all fall apart when the reality of their life together was thrown back into the mix? It was a Sunday afternoon when Emily's mom finally called, saying she would be back that evening. The tension in Emily's chest tightened. Her heart rate quickened. The thought of having to explain the shift between her and Steve, of confronting her mom with the truth, felt like an insurmountable obstacle. She wasn't sure how to handle it. Was she ready for it? Could they handle the fallout? When her mom arrived home, she looked tired but happy, holding a few bags from her trip. She set them down in the entryway and greeted Emily with a warm hug. "Hey, sweetie. How's everything been going?" "I missed you," her mom said, brushing her hair back as she stepped inside. Emily forced a smile, giving her mom a hug back. "I missed you too." Her mom tilted her head, noticing the slight change in Emily's demeanor. "What's going on? You seem a little off." The question, casual as it seemed, sent a sharp pang through Emily's chest. Should she tell her now? Should she lay everything out on the table and risk further complicating things? She paused for a moment, unsure. She had spent so much time feeling like an outsider in her own family, and now here was a chance to change that. But could she really open up, tell her mom about the conversation she'd had with Steve, about how everything felt different but fragile? Before she could say anything, Steve walked in, his voice calm as he spoke. "Hey, I'm back. Just wanted to check in and see how you're doing." His casual presence was enough to make Emily's stomach twist. It felt like the ground under her feet was shifting. The room was suddenly too small, too full of things left unsaid. Her mom turned to Steve, a smile playing on her lips. "Hey, Steve. I was just telling Emily how much I missed her. How was the trip? Everything okay?" Steve smiled back, but there was something guarded in his expression. "It was good. A little quiet without you here, but we managed." Emily's heart raced, her nerves jumbled as she watched her mom and Steve interact. She could see that Steve was trying, but there was still a distance between them. And it wasn't just the distance between him and her, it was the distance between them as a couple, as a family. She could feel the weight of the moment. Her mom seemed to sense the tension, too. She gave Emily a questioning look, then glanced between her and Steve. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Emily swallowed hard, her hands shaking slightly. She wasn't ready to bring everything up, but it felt like it had to be said. If they were ever going to heal, if she was ever going to feel like she truly belonged, this conversation needed to happen. Taking a deep breath, she finally spoke. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you." Her mom looked at her, her expression softening. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I had a conversation with Steve," Emily began slowly, her voice unsure. "We talked about some things. About how I've been feeling. About how I've felt kind of invisible in this family for a long time." Steve's eyes flicked to Emily, his face unreadable. He didn't speak, but there was a certain quiet understanding in the way he looked at her. She had expected him to get defensive, to brush her words off, but instead, he just nodded, as if acknowledging the truth in what she had said. Her mom's face shifted slightly. She took a step closer to Emily, her brow furrowing in concern. "What do you mean, honey? Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't know how," Emily admitted, her voice small. "I thought things would just get better on their own. But I've been feeling left out, like I don't really belong here." There was a long silence as her mom processed Emily's words. Steve stood a little farther back, his hands in his pockets. He was giving them space, but his presence felt larger than ever. Finally, her mom sighed, looking from Emily to Steve, and then back again. "I didn't know you felt that way, sweetie. I should have paid more attention. I should have noticed. I'm sorry. We've both made mistakes, haven't we?" Steve nodded, taking a step forward. "We have. And I'm sorry, Emily. I never meant to make you feel that way. I wasn't there when you needed me, and I'm going to try harder. I promise. Emily's heart fluttered slightly at his words. There was no grand gesture, no magical fix. But this honesty, this willingness to change, was what she needed. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like they were all finally seeing each other. And that, in itself, was a step forward. I'm glad you're both trying, Emily said softly, her voice filled with a quiet resolve. But it's going to take time. I need time. Her mom nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. I know, sweetie. We all do. But we're in this together. The words hung in the air, a fragile promise between them. As the evening wore on, Emily realized something. They weren't fixed yet. There were still so many things left unsaid, so many pieces of their relationship that still needed mending. But for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they could make it through. Together. The next few days after that pivotal conversation felt almost surreal. Emily had been waiting for some grand shift in the dynamics, but instead, everything seemed to remain in a delicate state of balance. There was still a quiet tension, an unspoken understanding that everything wasn't fixed. Yet, she couldn't ignore the sense of progress, small, but meaningful. Steve and her mom were trying harder now. Emily could see that. Steve's quiet gestures of care, like remembering her favorite coffee order or stopping by her room just to chat for a few minutes, were becoming more frequent. Her mom, too, seemed to be making an effort to bridge the gap. They were both doing their best, and while it wasn't perfect, it was a start. Still, there was a lingering uncertainty in Emily's mind. The question of whether this fragile balance could last, whether this effort would continue once the initial rush of good intentions faded, kept her up some nights. But more than that, there was the deeper question that Emily was still wrestling with. What did she really want from all of this? She had spent so many years feeling like an outsider in her own family, and now there was this strange mix of hope and fear. What would it mean to actually fit in, to finally belong in this little unit they were trying to rebuild? Could she let go of the past enough to make room for something better? One night, about a week after the conversation with her mom and Steve, Emily sat alone in the living room, the soft hum of the TV playing in the background. She wasn't really watching it, her mind was elsewhere. Her mom and Steve were in the kitchen, talking about something. They were always talking now, discussing everything from the mundane to the serious. It wasn't the silence she had grown accustomed to, but instead a kind of hesitant harmony, as if they were trying to find their rhythm as a family again. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was a text from Steve. Hey, I was thinking, you want to grab dinner tonight? Just the two of us. Emily stared at the message for a moment. She hadn't spent much one-on-one time with Steve since their last conversation. They had exchanged a few texts here and there, but this felt different. This felt like a genuine attempt to build something beyond the surface-level interactions they'd had for years. But there was a part of her that hesitated. Was she ready for this? Did she even want this? The past was always there, lingering in the back of her mind. The vacations she'd been excluded from, the family outings she had been left out of. She had spent so many years waiting for Steve to see her, to include her, to make her feel like she mattered. Could she really trust him now after everything that had happened? Yet, there was something in his message that made her want to give it a chance. He was trying. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Emily typed back a simple response. Sure. I'd like that. It felt like a small step. A step toward something new. Later that evening, Emily and Steve met at a cozy little Italian restaurant a few blocks from home. It was the kind of place that felt warm and welcoming, with checkered tablecloths and soft lighting. The air was thick with the scent of fresh basil and garlic, a perfect contrast to the chill outside. Steve was already there when Emily arrived, sitting at a corner table by the window. He stood up as soon as he saw her, giving her a small, slightly nervous smile. "Hey," he greeted, pulling out the chair for her. "Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure if you'd want to." Emily smiled, a bit unsure herself. "It's fine. I wanted to." As they sat down, the waiter came over to take their orders. Emily found herself suddenly more aware of the silence between them. The conversation had been easy enough when they'd texted, but in person, it felt like they were both searching for the right words to say. Steve broke the ice first, his voice light. "So, how's school going? You still enjoying it?" Emily chuckled, appreciating the effort to keep things casual. "Yeah, it's going well. I'm actually working on a project about climate change right now. It's kind of overwhelming, but also interesting." "That sounds intense," Steve said, his brow furrowing slightly. "But also really important. I'm glad you're working on something you care about." Emily nodded, feeling a little surprised by his comment. It wasn't that she hadn't expected him to be supportive. It was just that it had been so long since he had genuinely engaged with what was going on in her life. She realized, for the first time in a while, that she appreciated it. That he cared, even if he hadn't always shown it in the past. Their conversation meandered from school to movies to music, a mix of light topics that kept things comfortable but not too deep. Still, Emily could sense the unspoken weight between them. There was so much left to discuss, so much left to understand, but neither of them seemed ready to dive into it yet. Finally, after a while, Steve set down his fork and looked at her more seriously. "Emily, I just want you to know that I'm trying. I know I messed up before, and I can't change that. But I want you to know that I'm here for you. I know it's not going to be easy, but I'm willing to put in the work. I don't want you to feel like you're alone in this anymore." The sincerity in his voice took Emily by surprise. She could see it now. He wasn't just offering words. He was offering his actions. And though it wasn't perfect, it was a lot more than she had ever expected from him. "I know you are," Emily said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "And I'm trying too. I'm trying to let go of the past, to stop seeing you as the person who left me out. But it's hard. I can't just forget everything that happened." Steve nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I get it. And I'm not asking you to. I'm asking for a chance to do better." For a moment, there was silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was more like a shared understanding. They weren't pretending that everything was fixed, that everything was okay. But they were acknowledging the effort, the vulnerability, the willingness to move forward. "I'll give you that chance," Emily said finally, her voice quiet but firm. Steve smiled, a look of genuine relief crossing his face. "Thank you." As they finished their meal, the conversation flowed a little more easily, the weight of their past slowly dissipating in the warm glow of the restaurant. Emily couldn't say that everything was perfect, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like there was a chance for something real. Something they could build together. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. But maybe, just maybe, it was worth it. The next few weeks unfolded in a strange limbo. The air at home wasn't as heavy as it had been, but neither was it light. It was more like a tentative truce between Emily, her mom, and Steve. Each of them seemed to be walking carefully, as though afraid that any wrong step would shatter the delicate balance they had begun to build. Emily had tried her best to adjust to the new dynamics, but it wasn't easy. The conversations were more frequent. Yes, they spoke more than they had in years. But there was still an underlying tension, small things that didn't quite feel right. It was the look Steve would give her mom sometimes when she wasn't looking, the one that seemed to carry a weight of unspoken words. It was the way her mom's laugh didn't quite reach her eyes whenever she caught herself making a joke at Steve's expense. It wasn't that the love wasn't there. It was there, somewhere, hiding beneath the surface. But there were cracks. The kind of cracks that Emily knew too well. And they were growing. Her mom had seemed happier since returning from her trip, but Emily could sense a difference in her. She wasn't as carefree, not as open as before. There were moments when she would glance at Steve with a certain hesitation, as if she was unsure of the person he had become. Or perhaps unsure of who she was becoming in his presence. And Emily didn't know how to address that. One afternoon, when Emily came home early from school, she found her mom sitting at the kitchen table, her fingers tapping nervously against her coffee cup. Steve wasn't home, and for a brief moment, Emily wondered if it was just the two of them, if this was the time to talk about what was really going on. Her mom looked up at her, her expression soft but guarded. "Hey, sweetie, how was school?" Emily hesitated for a moment before answering. "It was okay. I wanted to talk to you about something, though." Her mom raised an eyebrow, her fingers pausing mid-tap. "What's up?" Emily took a deep breath, the words coming out in a rush. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About us and about you and Steve." Her mom didn't immediately respond, and for a long moment, the kitchen felt silent, almost oppressive. Finally, she set the coffee cup down gently, a small sigh escaping her lips. "I figured this was coming," she murmured, more to herself than to Emily. "What do you mean?" Emily asked, confused. Her mom's gaze shifted toward the window, her voice distant. "You've been distant lately, Emily. I've noticed. And I know you've been having a hard time with everything, with the changes. I'm not blind to that. But there's something else too, isn't there?" Emily felt a lump form in her throat. "What do you mean?" Her mom looked back at her, her eyes heavy with emotion. "You're worried, aren't you? You're worried that things will go back to how they were before. You're worried that all of this will fall apart again." The words stung, but they were true. Emily had been trying to ignore it, trying to act like everything was fine, but her mom had hit the nail on the head. The truth was, Emily was terrified. Terrified that this fragile balance they had created would shatter, just like everything else had before. Terrified that Steve would slip back into the person he had been, that her mom would continue to ignore the cracks in their relationship. "I'm scared," Emily admitted, her voice small. "I don't want to go back to the way things were. I don't want to feel like I don't matter again. But I don't know if I can trust Steve yet, Mom. I don't know if I can trust that this is real, that you two can make it work." Her mom didn't say anything for a long time. She just sat there, her face unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet and almost fragile. "I want you to understand something, Emily," she began. "Steve and we're both trying. We're trying to be better for you, for each other. I can't promise that everything will be perfect, that there won't be moments of doubt or moments where we struggle. But I do promise that I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, and I'm going to make this work, even if it takes time." Emily's heart tightened as she processed her mom's words. Part of her wanted to believe her. Part of her wanted to hope that things would be okay. But another part of her, the part that had been burned by all the broken promises, was unsure. Could they really fix what had been so broken for so long? "I don't want you to be disappointed again, Mom," Emily said quietly. "I don't want to watch you get hurt again." Her mom smiled faintly, a sadness in her eyes. "I know you don't. And I promise I'll be careful. But I need you to trust me. Trust that I'm doing what I think is best, even if it doesn't always look like it." The conversation hung in the air between them, both of them sitting in silence for a few moments. Emily wasn't sure if she was ready to fully trust her mom's assurances, but she didn't know how else to move forward. She didn't know how to move forward with Steve, either. That evening, Steve came home later than usual. When he walked through the door, Emily could sense that something was different. There was a weight in the air that she couldn't quite place. Her mom was at the stove, cooking dinner, her back to him as she hummed quietly to herself. Steve paused in the doorway, his eyes flicking to Emily, who was sitting at the kitchen table, lost in thought. There was a flicker of uncertainty in his expression, but he didn't say anything at first. Instead, he took off his jacket and hung it on the coat rack before walking over to where Emily sat. "Hey," he said softly, his voice more tentative than usual. How was your day? Emily looked up at him, her gaze searching his face. He seemed off, more distant than he had been recently. But there was something else too. Something behind his eyes. It was okay, she answered, her voice guarded. Steve hesitated, as if he was trying to decide whether to say something more. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. Can we talk? Just for a minute. Emily nodded, her stomach flipping uneasily. She didn't know what this conversation was going to be, but she was afraid of where it might lead. Her heart raced as they stepped out of the kitchen, the quiet of the house swallowing them whole. Steve glanced at her, his face conflicted. I don't want to push you too hard, Emily, he began. I know you've been through a lot, but I need to be honest with you. I'm scared too. I don't know if we're doing the right thing, if we're doing enough to fix this. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Was this doubt creeping in? Was he questioning everything again? You're not the only one who's scared, she said quietly, her voice trembling. But we can't just give up, Steve. Not again. He looked at her, his eyes filled with something unspoken. And for a brief moment, Emily saw the flicker of vulnerability behind his usual guarded expression. I'm trying, Emily, Steve said, his voice heavy with sincerity. I really am. And in that moment, she believed him. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days following that conversation with Steve lingered in Emily's mind, like a cloud that refused to dissipate. There was something haunting about the way Steve had spoken, as if he was on the edge of giving up, or maybe, just maybe, on the verge of something important. He was trying, yes, but for some reason, Emily couldn't shake the nagging doubt that had crept into her thoughts. They had been having a series of conversations, these small but significant exchanges, but she couldn't help feeling like there was more that was still unspoken. More that neither of them was willing to confront. The question, she realized, was not just about whether Steve could change, it was whether she could ever truly trust him. Trust his actions, his words, his promises. The following weekend, Emily decided to take a step back and really focus on herself. She had spent so much time trying to navigate the mess of family dynamics, trying to fit in, trying to heal, that she had almost forgotten to check in with her own feelings. It was easy to forget about her own needs when she was wrapped up in everyone else's. That Saturday, she woke up early, a slight chill in the air from the early morning breeze. She made herself a cup of coffee, not for the caffeine, but for the routine of it. Sitting down at the kitchen table, she pulled out her notebook and began jotting down her thoughts. She didn't know why she needed to write them out, but it felt like the only way she could make sense of the chaos inside her head. Why am I still so afraid? Her pen hovered over the paper for a moment, as though trying to find the words that made sense. Her heart wasn't in it yet, but the more she wrote, the more the fog in her mind seemed to lift. She wrote about her childhood, about the confusion she had felt growing up, about the absence of her dad and the distance she had felt from Steve. She wrote about her mom's silent battles and the way their family had always seemed to crumble at the seams, one broken piece at a time. The deeper she wrote, the more she realized the past wasn't just haunting her. It was shaping the way she saw everything. Steve's every attempt, every new gesture, was colored by her past experiences. Every time he said something that felt off or didn't quite match his actions, it triggered the fear that she was just going to be let down again. She had been let down so many times before that it had become second nature to prepare for disappointment. Emily wasn't sure how long she had been sitting there, but when her mom came in, her footsteps light and tentative, Emily hadn't noticed the time passing. "Hey, sweetie," her mom said, her voice softer than usual. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I was going to grab some breakfast, but I saw you were up already." Emily looked up from her notebook, startled by the intrusion. She quickly covered the paper with her hand, as if shielding her innermost thoughts. But her mom's eyes softened with understanding. "It's okay," her mom said gently. "You don't have to hide it from me." Emily felt her stomach churn slightly. "I just needed to get some things off my chest. It's been a lot lately." Her mom nodded and sat down across from her, still holding the warm mug of coffee. "I know it has. For both of us." A few moments passed in silence before her mom spoke again. "You're not alone in this, Emily. You're not the only one who's been hurt by all of this, you know. I've been carrying my own guilt, my own regrets. I can't change the past, but I need you to know that I'm trying to do better." The vulnerability in her mom's voice caught Emily off guard. She had never heard her mom admit to feeling that way before. It was always Emily who had been the one to feel fragile, to feel like the one who had been abandoned. But now she saw it differently. Her mom had her own fears and regrets, ones she had never shared with Emily. "I know you're trying, Mom," Emily said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "And I'm trying too. But sometimes it feels like we're just going through the motions, like we're not really moving forward." Her mom leaned forward, her eyes locking with Emily's. "It's okay to feel that way, Emily. I get it. But you have to remember that healing isn't a straight line. It's messy, it's complicated, and sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. But we're here, together." Emily's heart warmed at the words, though there was still a part of her that wasn't ready to fully accept the idea of together. She still feared the fragility of it, the way things could come undone at any moment. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe her mom wasn't just talking about herself. Maybe she was talking about them. About the two of them and Steve too. Maybe it was all a mess right now, but maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to stay that way forever. Later that evening, Steve suggested they all watch a movie together. The idea felt strange at first. It was something they hadn't done in a while, not since before the distance had grown between them. But something about the suggestion felt warm, like it might be the kind of thing that could bridge the gap between them, if only for a few hours. The 3 of them gathered in the living room, sitting on the couch. The lights were dimmed, the soft glow of the TV screen the only light in the room. It felt almost like it used to, before everything got so complicated. Steve and her mom sat together, their shoulders almost touching. Emily sat a little apart from them, unsure of how to fit in this newly reconstructed version of their family. But she didn't want to pull away, not entirely. So, she let herself stay, even though a part of her was still unsure. The movie began, but it wasn't long before Emily realized she wasn't paying attention to the plot at all. She was watching her mom and Steve instead, watching how they interacted, the little glances they shared when something funny happened on the screen, the way her mom leaned into Steve, as if she was still finding comfort in his presence. It was such a small thing, so insignificant to most people. But to Emily, it felt like the first crack in the wall she had built around herself. Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe it never would be. But for the first time in a long time, Emily allowed herself to think that maybe this could work. Maybe this fragile, tentative hope could transform into something more real. And maybe, just maybe, she could let herself be part of it. As the days passed, Emily felt like she was caught in a strange balancing act. On one hand, she was trying to trust her mom's words, trying to believe that things could be different, that maybe the broken pieces of their family could be put back together. On the other hand, every small crack in their attempts to heal, every hesitation, sent her into a spiral of doubt. The fear that things might fall apart again never fully went away. But something had changed in her, too. She had noticed it when she woke up this morning. Something inside her had shifted. It was a subtle thing, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She could feel herself becoming more aware of her own needs, her own feelings. This wasn't just about repairing her relationship with Steve or even about getting back the family she had once known. It was about figuring out who she was, who she wanted to be, and where she fit in this confusing, shifting world. And that was something she hadn't really thought about before, not in this way. That morning, after another uneventful breakfast, Emily grabbed her backpack and headed out the door. She needed space, and school, for all its mundane routine, was the one place where she didn't have to think about all the messiness at home. The hallways were filled with the usual chatter, the clinking of lockers, and the low hum of students moving from one class to the next. But Emily couldn't shake the heaviness in her chest. It was a familiar feeling, one she had carried with her for years, the weight of being caught between two worlds, one where things were supposed to be normal, and the other where everything felt uncertain and broken. In history class, she found herself zoning out, her thoughts drifting away from the lecture on ancient civilizations to the things that had been happening at home. Her mom seemed happier, but she wasn't completely herself. Steve was trying, but his attempts still felt like a facade sometimes. And Emily couldn't figure out where she fit in this new version of their family. Was she the daughter who had been left behind? Was she the person who still had to pick up the pieces, even though it felt like they were too broken to be put back together? The bell rang, snapping Emily out of her thoughts. She gathered her things and walked out of class, her mind swirling with confusion. As she passed the hallway lockers, she noticed Sarah, her best friend, leaning against a row of lockers, looking at her phone. "Hey, Em," Sarah called out, waving her over. "Hey," Emily replied, forcing a smile. "What's up? You okay?" Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow. "You've seemed a little off lately." Emily hesitated for a moment. She could feel the weight of her thoughts, the unspoken emotions swirling around her, but she didn't know how to explain them to Sarah, not in a way that would make sense. "I don't know," Emily admitted finally. "It's just stuff at home. Everything's kind of weird right now." Sarah frowned, her expression softening. "Did you want to talk about it?" Emily shook her head. "I don't even know where to start. I guess it's just hard. I'm trying to figure out where I belong, you know." Sarah nodded in understanding. "Yeah, I get it. That can't be easy. But hey, you're not alone in this, okay? You've got me. If you ever need to talk, I'm here." Emily felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She didn't say anything, but the reassurance in Sarah's voice was like a lifeline. It felt good to be seen, even if just for a moment. Sometimes, it was the smallest gestures that made the biggest difference. "Thanks, Sarah," Emily said quietly. As she made her way to the next class, Emily couldn't help but wonder if she was putting too much pressure on herself. Maybe she didn't need to figure everything out right away. Maybe it was okay to not have all the answers. Maybe, just maybe, she could take things one step at a time. That evening, after dinner, Steve sat on the couch, staring at the television but not really watching. Emily noticed the way his posture had changed since the conversation they'd had a few days ago. He seemed more withdrawn, more distant. His usual attempts at engaging with her and her mom felt strained, like he was holding something back. Her mom was in the kitchen, washing dishes, and Emily had been sitting on the opposite side of the room, reading a book, trying to focus on anything that would take her mind off the tension that hung in the air. But then Steve turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Hey, Emily," he said, his voice quiet. Emily looked up from her book, meeting his gaze. "Yeah?" He hesitated for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "I know things have been hard, and I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. I know I haven't always been the best stepdad, and I know I've messed up. I just want you to know that I'm trying to make things right. I really am." Emily felt her chest tighten. She had heard him say similar things before, and the words, while sincere, didn't always carry the weight they needed. She had heard apologies and promises for years, but they hadn't been enough to undo the damage. "I appreciate that, Steve," Emily said carefully. "But it's not just about the words, you know? It's about actions. It's about how things change. I need to know that you're not just saying things to make things better. I need to see it. I need to feel it. Steve nodded slowly, his eyes dropping to the floor. I get it. I know it's not enough. But I'm working on it. I'm trying to be better for you and for your mom. Emily didn't know what else to say. She had heard the words, but a part of her still couldn't fully believe them. It wasn't just about Steve trying. It was about her ability to trust that the changes were real, that the things he was doing weren't just temporary fixes. The silence in the room stretched on, and Emily found herself wondering if they would ever get to a point where the weight of their past mistakes would finally be lifted. She wanted to believe that things could get better, that they could build something real again, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. Steve eventually stood up and walked out of the room, his shoulders heavy. Emily watched him go, her mind a whirl of thoughts and emotions. She wanted to believe in the possibility of change. But for now, all she could do was wait and see. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Emily realized that maybe she had been looking for an answer that didn't exist, at least not yet. There was no quick fix, no sudden revelation that would make everything okay. It was a process, slow and uneven. And maybe that was the point. It wasn't about finding a perfect solution. It was about learning how to navigate the messiness of life, step by step, with the hope that one day it would make sense. For now, she could only take things one day at a time. The weeks rolled on, and despite her best efforts, Emily couldn't shake the undercurrent of uncertainty that seemed to follow her everywhere. The shifts in the household dynamics were subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. But to Emily, every small change felt like a potential crack in the foundation she had spent so long trying to rebuild. Every time she saw her mom and Steve in a moment of quiet togetherness, every time Steve said something that almost felt like an apology, her heart would flutter with hope, but then doubt would creep in, swift and uninvited. It wasn't that she didn't want things to get better. She did. She really did. She wanted to be able to smile at her mom without that heavy knot in her chest. She wanted to be able to laugh at Steve's dumb jokes and not feel like she was pretending. But the ghosts of their past, her past, kept pulling her back, as if she could never outrun them. That afternoon, after school, Emily took a walk to clear her head. The weather had turned colder, and the crisp autumn air bit at her cheeks as she walked down the familiar streets of their neighborhood. She was trying to focus on the present, trying to remind herself that things weren't as bad as they seemed. But the question loomed large. Could she ever really forgive Steve? Could she ever truly trust him, knowing everything that had happened? She thought about the way he used to be when they first moved in together, closed off, distant, unsure of how to navigate his new role as her stepdad. She thought about the way their relationship had started to fragment, the emotional distance that had gradually grown between them. How many chances had she given him before? How many broken promises had they both made to each other, only to fall short? With a sigh, Emily sat down on a bench in the park, letting the cool breeze ruffle her hair. Her mind wandered back to that conversation she'd had with her mom a few days ago. Her mom had been open, vulnerable in a way that Emily hadn't expected. It was rare for her mom to admit to her own mistakes, but when she had, Emily had felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe they could figure this out together. Maybe she wasn't the only one carrying the weight of the past. But that flicker of hope hadn't erased the doubt that lingered in Emily's mind. She wanted to believe in the possibility of something new, something better. But the truth was, it was hard. And sometimes it felt like the past was an anchor that held her back, even when she was trying to move forward. That evening, as Emily walked back through the front door, she was met with the familiar sound of her mom and Steve laughing in the kitchen. They were making dinner together, something they did on occasion, and for a moment, Emily hesitated, standing just inside the doorway, unsure of what to do. "Hey, her mom called out, smiling brightly. "Dinner's almost ready. Wanna help?" Emily hesitated for a second before nodding. "Sure. She walked over to the kitchen, where Steve stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot. The sight of them working together felt so normal, so comfortable. But that feeling was quickly followed by a stab of discomfort. Emily realized that she wasn't sure how to fit into this new version of their family. She wasn't sure where her place was anymore. "How was your day?" Steve asked, looking up briefly from the stove. "It was fine," Emily replied, a little too quickly. She didn't want to engage too much, didn't want to make this any harder than it had to be. "School's just, school." Steve nodded, but there was a small, almost tentative smile on his face. "Good to hear. I'm glad things are going okay." Emily didn't respond. She didn't have the energy to pretend that everything was fine. She didn't have the energy to pretend that she wasn't still carrying around a heavy weight, one that didn't just belong to her, but to all of them. As they sat down for dinner, Emily couldn't help but notice the way her mom and Steve kept looking at each other, their glances filled with something that Emily couldn't quite place. Affection, maybe. Or even just the ease of two people who had shared years of history together. She felt like an outsider in her own home, as though she were observing from a distance, unsure of how to step back into the frame. "So," Steve said between bites of food, his voice breaking through the silence, "I was thinking about taking a trip. Just the three of us. Maybe a weekend getaway. I think it could be good for us to spend some time together outside of the house, away from all the stress." Emily felt her stomach tighten at the suggestion. A weekend getaway? The idea was nice in theory, but it felt premature. She wasn't ready to dive back into that version of their family. Not yet. "I don't know," Emily said carefully, putting her fork down. "It might be nice, but I'm not sure if I'm ready for something like that." Her mom looked at her, her expression soft, but searching. "We don't have to do it if you're not comfortable, Emily. We just thought it might help. To break the routine, "I get that," Emily replied, her voice quiet. "But I don't know if it's the right time for me. I've still got a lot to figure out." Steve's gaze fell to his plate, his lips pressed together in a tight line. Emily could tell that he was disappointed, but she wasn't sure if he was disappointed in her, or if it was more a reflection of his own hope for things to be different, for things to work out. She couldn't help but wonder if he was trying too hard to fix everything, to make up for the things he couldn't change. The rest of dinner passed in a muted silence, the tension in the air palpable. Emily pushed her food around on her plate, not really hungry, and every now and then, she caught glimpses of her mom and Steve exchanging small, unspoken looks, as if they were communicating something she wasn't a part of. It was the kind of communication that seemed intimate, built on years of shared experience, and Emily couldn't help but feel left out. When the meal was over and they all gathered in the living room, it was clear that the unease had settled in again. It wasn't a fight, not exactly. There was no shouting, no dramatic outbursts. It was just quiet. The kind of quiet that filled the spaces between people, that made everything feel too heavy to breathe through. As Emily sat there, staring at the TV screen, she realized that the worst part of all of this wasn't the conflict. It wasn't the misunderstandings or the silence. The hardest part was the waiting, the uncertainty, the feeling of being stuck, caught in the middle of something she couldn't change, but had to somehow learn to live with. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily tried to push away the anxiety that gnawed at her insides. She had a feeling she wasn't going to be able to shake it anytime soon. But for now, she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to remind herself that things didn't have to be figured out all at once. It was okay to take things one day at a time. Maybe that was the only thing she could do. The weekend came around quickly, and with it, the promise of a fresh start, or so Emily tried to convince herself. There was a sense of reluctance in her, though. Her mom had brought up the idea of the family getaway again, and Emily had been quiet about it for days. Steve was trying hard to create new memories, new experiences. But every time Emily thought about the trip, she felt an increasing pressure on her chest. Could she really go on a vacation with Steve? Was she ready to put herself in a situation where she would have to face not just the uncertainty of her family's future, but also the weight of everything that had happened? Her mom had tried to make it sound casual, like an easy weekend getaway. But to Emily, it felt like a test, one that she wasn't sure she was ready for. Still, part of her knew she couldn't avoid it forever. If there was any hope of moving forward, this was the kind of thing she would have to confront. On Saturday morning, her mom and Steve were bustling around the house, packing bags, making sure everything was in order. Their excitement was almost palpable, but Emily felt a cold knot in her stomach that she couldn't shake. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching them work, wondering if this trip was the turning point she had been waiting for, or if it was going to be yet another reminder of how much her family had changed. "Hey, you want to help me with the snacks?" her mom asked, glancing up at her with a hopeful smile. "Sure," Emily replied, her voice flat. She grabbed a bag of chips from the counter and began organizing them into smaller containers, trying to focus on the task at hand rather than the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. Steve walked into the kitchen then, carrying 2 large duffel bags, and placed them next to the door. He looked at Emily with a hopeful expression. "You sure you're okay with all of this? We don't want you to feel pressured. If you need some time, we can always plan this for later." Emily paused, her hand stilling over the chips as she tried to put words to the feelings inside her. "I don't know, Steve. I'm not sure I'm ready for something like this. Things have been difficult, and I don't want to pretend they're not." Steve nodded slowly, his face softening. "I get it. I really do. I just thought it might help us, break away from everything for a little bit. Sometimes it's easier to figure things out when you're not caught up in the day-to-day stuff." Emily met his eyes, her heart pounding. "I don't know if it's that easy, Steve. Things don't just get fixed by going away for a weekend. It's not that simple." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was a tense silence in the room. Emily's mom stepped in then, her voice gentle but firm. "We don't expect this trip to fix everything, sweetheart. But we want to try. And we're all doing this together, okay? I don't want you to feel like you're alone in this. I know it's been tough, but we're going to try, one step at a time." Emily swallowed hard, feeling a lump rise in her throat. She had always been the one who held everything inside, who tried to protect her mom from the worst of things. But this time, it felt different. She couldn't pretend anymore, couldn't keep pushing everything down, hoping it would disappear. "I'm not sure how to be a part of this," Emily said softly. "I'm not sure how to be a part of this family anymore." Her mom's face softened with understanding. She reached over and took Emily's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I know it's hard, I know it's been hard for all of us, but we're trying. And you're part of this family, no matter how hard it gets. We want to fix things with you too. We want you to feel like you belong again." Steve stood quietly, watching them, and for a moment, Emily could almost see the sincerity in his eyes. She wasn't ready to forgive him completely, but in that instant, she understood that he wasn't giving up on her. Maybe that was the start of something she hadn't been able to see before. But that didn't change the way her heart felt. There was still that gnawing feeling in her chest, that constant ache of doubt. Was this really a new beginning? Or was it just another attempt to paper over the cracks? By late afternoon, the bags were packed, the car was loaded, and the family was on the road. Emily sat in the back seat, headphones on, gazing out the window as the landscape blurred by. Her mind wandered, slipping in and out of thoughts. She tried to focus on the scenery, the passing trees, and the occasional glimpse of open fields. But no matter how hard she tried, her thoughts kept drifting back to her family. The things they had been through, the things she had felt. The silence in the car was suffocating at times, with only the soft hum of the engine and the occasional words exchanged between her mom and Steve. It was a strange, awkward quiet, filled with so much unspoken tension. Emily couldn't tell if they were trying to be patient with her or if they were simply pretending everything was fine. Every now and then, she would glance over at Steve, who was focused on the road, and wonder what he was thinking. What had changed in him? Was it just words, or had he really changed? Could she ever see him the way she used to? The drive seemed endless, and Emily found herself retreating further into her thoughts. It was easier to keep her distance emotionally, to stay inside her bubble where nothing could hurt her. But even she knew that wasn't a solution. Eventually, she would have to face everything, the hurt, the fear, the uncertainty. As the sun began to set and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, they finally arrived at their destination, a small cabin tucked away in the woods. It was picturesque, the kind of place you'd expect to find in a postcard. But as Emily stepped out of the car, she felt a wave of unease wash over her. "Welcome to our home for the weekend," Steve said, turning to look at her with a small, tentative smile. "I hope you like it." Emily didn't say anything. She just stood there, staring at the cabin, trying to convince herself that she could relax, that this trip could be the start of something better. But as she walked inside, she knew that the real journey wasn't the one they were about to take in these woods. It was the journey of figuring out what it meant to truly trust, to truly heal. Later that night, after they had settled into the cabin, Emily found herself sitting on the porch alone, staring at the stars. The night was clear, and the world seemed vast, endless. She couldn't help but think about how small she felt, how lost she sometimes felt in her own life. There was so much she didn't understand, so much she still had to figure out. But as she sat there in the quiet, she realized that maybe it wasn't about having all the answers. Maybe it was about taking one small step, one moment at a time. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The next morning, the air was fresh, the sunlight filtered through the trees outside, casting dappled shadows across the cabin floor. Emily had hardly slept, the uncertainty of it all gnawing at her insides. The night had felt long, filled with too many restless thoughts. She kept replaying the conversations, the awkward silences, and Steve's tentative smile. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything was teetering on the edge of something good, something bad, something she couldn't yet define. Her mom was up early, as usual, already brewing coffee and humming softly as she moved around the kitchen. Steve was nowhere to be seen, probably off taking a walk or dealing with the campfire outside. Emily stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the serene morning landscape, the fog slowly lifting from the trees as the warmth of the sun began to break through the cool air. It was beautiful, the kind of peace that made you feel like you could breathe again. But somehow, the beauty of it only deepened her sense of confusion. Could she feel at peace with everything going on in her life? She sat down at the kitchen table, her mom handing her a cup of coffee before sitting down across from her, both of them silent for a few moments. The soft clink of a spoon stirring sugar was the only sound breaking the stillness. "So," her mom said, breaking the silence, her voice gentle, almost cautious. "How are you feeling?" Emily took a slow sip of her coffee, staring down at the dark liquid in her cup. "I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to figure things out." She paused, considering her words carefully. "I keep wondering if this trip is going to change anything, or if it's just another distraction. I don't know if I can just forget everything that's happened. I can't pretend like it didn't matter." Her mom sighed, her eyes filled with something between understanding and sorrow. "I know, sweetheart. I know it's not easy. But sometimes, it's not about forgetting. It's about moving forward. And we're trying. I know it hasn't been perfect, but we are trying." Emily felt a pang in her chest. She wanted so much to believe that. She wanted so much to be able to look at Steve and feel like the man who had once been a stranger to her, the man who had broken everything she had known, could be the same man who wanted to make it right. But part of her wasn't sure if she was ready to let go of the past, to let go of the hurt. Before she could respond, the The sound of footsteps echoed from outside. Steve appeared in the doorway, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said, his voice a little too bright. "Beautiful day, huh?" Emily forced a smile, trying not to let the awkwardness between them show. "Yeah, it is." Her mom got up to prepare breakfast, and the conversation fizzled into nothingness. There was a heaviness in the air that no amount of small talk could lift. Steve was trying so hard. Emily could see it, but his efforts felt forced, too much like something he was trying to make up for rather than something he truly wanted. Emily found herself withdrawing further, unsure of how to meet him halfway. Breakfast was quiet. Her mom tried to keep things light, asking about Emily's plans for the day, but Emily could barely bring herself to engage. She kept thinking about everything that had led to this moment, everything that had happened between her, her mom, and Steve. Could a weekend getaway really fix all of that? Could it make everything feel better, or would it just prolong the inevitable, her need to face the truth of it all? After breakfast, Emily took a walk by herself, needing to escape the suffocating weight of the cabin for a little while. She wandered down a small trail that led into the woods, her footsteps soft on the ground, the leaves crunching under her sneakers. She needed space. She needed time to think. The woods were peaceful, the only sound the rustle of leaves and the occasional bird call. As she walked deeper, she found herself sitting on a large rock by a small stream, watching the water flow lazily by. It was a calming sight, but her mind was anything but calm. "Hey," came Steve's voice from behind her, causing Emily to startle. She hadn't heard him approach. She turned around slowly, meeting his eyes. His face was drawn, his posture stiff, as if he was unsure of how to approach her. "Hey," she replied, her voice flat. He took a cautious step closer, his hands still in his pockets. "Mind if I sit?" Emily shrugged, not really sure what to say, but not wanting to push him away either. It was complicated. She didn't know how to navigate this strange in-between space they found themselves in. Steve sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "I know this isn't easy," he said quietly, staring out at the stream. "And I don't expect it to be. I don't know. I'm trying, Emily. I really am. I want to make things better." Emily felt a knot in her stomach tighten at his words. "You don't get it, Steve. You can't just try to fix things with a trip or with words. It's not that simple." Steve's face softened, and for the first time in a long time, Emily saw something raw in his expression, vulnerability. "I know it's not. I know I messed up. I can't take back what I did. But I want to be better. For you. For your mom. I want us to be a family again." The words hung in the air, heavy with their meaning. Emily didn't respond immediately. She couldn't. She felt the weight of his confession pressing down on her, but the anger, the hurt, everything she had been carrying was still there, lingering just beneath the surface. She wasn't ready to forgive him. She didn't know if she ever would be. "I don't know if I can believe that, Steve," Emily finally said, her voice small, shaky. "I don't know if I can trust you again." Steve didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, looking at the stream, lost in thought. The silence between them stretched, each of them caught in their own thoughts. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm asking for a chance. A chance to prove that I can be better, that I can do right by you, by all of us." Emily closed her eyes, trying to block out the rush of emotions that flooded through her. She had been so angry for so long, so hurt. Could she really let go of that? Could she really give Steve a chance to prove himself? The truth was, she didn't know. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't so sure about what the answer was. The decision was still hers to make, but the path ahead wasn't as clear as it once had been. That afternoon, as they headed back to the cabin, Emily was filled with an unfamiliar sense of uncertainty. She had always been the one to keep her distance, to protect herself from getting hurt. But now, she wasn't so sure if that was the answer. She wasn't so sure about anything anymore. But as they all sat down for dinner later that evening, a quiet part of her wondered if maybe, just maybe, this trip could be the first step toward something better. Maybe. The next day, the sun was once again bright and golden, the sky clear and blue, almost too perfect to be real. Emily found herself awake before the others, sitting by the window, watching the forest wake up with the morning light. There was a stillness in the air, almost as if the world around her had paused, waiting for her to make her move. Her thoughts were scattered, as always, but this morning felt different. Something about the silence felt heavy, like the calm before a storm, or perhaps the calm after one. She wasn't sure yet. The cabin, though beautiful in its rustic charm, felt like a place suspended in time. There were no distractions here. No running away. It was just them, surrounded by nature, and Emily couldn't escape the weight of her emotions. The past few days had brought up so much that she hadn't been ready to face. She thought she could come here and shut out the chaos of her life. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that running away wasn't the solution. This trip wasn't going to make everything magically better. It wasn't a fix-all. But maybe it could offer something else: clarity. Or, at the very least, some understanding. She heard footsteps behind her, soft and slow. Her mom appeared in the doorway, her hair slightly disheveled, but her eyes soft with a knowing look. "You're up early," she said, voice filled with quiet affection. Emily glanced up at her mom and offered a small smile. "Couldn't sleep." Her mom nodded and stepped inside, sitting down beside her. "I get it. This place has a way of making you think, doesn't it?" Emily didn't respond immediately, her gaze drifting back to the window. The trees outside were still, the world serene in a way that felt almost surreal. But inside her, nothing was calm. Everything was jumbled, emotions she hadn't sorted through, memories she couldn't make sense of, and a future she couldn't quite envision. "I don't know what to do anymore," Emily said quietly, her voice breaking the stillness. "I want to move forward, but every time I think I can, it feels like there's this wall between me and everything I want to fix." Her mom placed a hand on her shoulder, a comforting gesture. "Sweetheart, I know it's hard. I know this isn't easy for you. And I know you're scared. But remember, moving forward doesn't mean you have to forget everything that's happened. It just means you're choosing to heal, one step at a time." Emily shook her head, her emotions starting to build. "But how do I heal when it feels like the damage is so deep? I'm not sure how to get past it, how to trust again." Her mom's expression softened with understanding, and she looked out the window for a moment. "Trust is hard, Emily. It's not something that just happens overnight. It takes time. And sometimes, it means taking a leap of faith even when you're not sure if it'll catch you." Emily was quiet for a long time after that. She wasn't sure if her mom's words made things clearer, but they did offer something, a possibility, a chance. It wasn't much, but it was something. After a long pause, Emily finally looked at her mom. "Do you really think we can get past this? Do you think Steve and I can ever be okay again?" Her mom didn't answer immediately, but instead, she gave Emily a small, knowing smile. "I think we can try. That's all we can do, Emily. Just try. And we'll take it one day at a time." Emily exhaled deeply, feeling a mix of uncertainty and relief. She wasn't ready to let go of the past. She wasn't sure she could be. But her mom was right. Maybe it wasn't about erasing the past. Maybe it was about finding a way to move forward, no matter how small the steps. Later that afternoon, Emily and Steve went for a hike together. It wasn't planned, it just happened. After a quiet breakfast, her mom had suggested they get some fresh air, and Steve, ever eager to bridge the gap between them, suggested they go out for a walk in the woods. It was strange, walking beside Steve in this setting, in silence. Emily felt like she was walking with a stranger. But the longer they went, the more the awkwardness began to fade. The silence wasn't so heavy anymore. They walked side by side, not talking much, but it didn't feel as forced as it had before. Finally, Steve spoke, his voice low and careful. "I know things haven't been easy, Emily. I know I've made mistakes, and I'm sorry. I don't want you to think I'm giving up on you. On us." Emily looked at him then, really looked at him. He wasn't perfect. He couldn't erase what had happened, but she could see that he was trying. And maybe that was enough for now. "I don't know if I can forgive you right now, Steve," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But I don't want to keep holding onto the anger either. I just need time." Steve nodded, his face filled with relief. "I understand. And I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. Just that we can try. That we can move forward, even if it's one small step at a time." They continued walking, the sound of their footsteps soft in the quiet woods. Emily didn't know if they were ready to make things right. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like there was a chance. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. That night, after dinner, the family gathered around the fire pit outside. The crackling of the fire, the glow of the flames, and the warmth in the air created an atmosphere that felt both comforting and intimate. Emily sat next to her mom, with Steve on the other side. The moment felt almost normal, like a family gathering that had happened 100 times before. But in the back of her mind, Emily knew this wasn't just a typical family night. This was something new, something fragile. As they sat there, talking about nothing in particular, Emily's thoughts wandered. She couldn't forget everything that had happened, but maybe, just maybe, she could start to build something new. Trust would take time. Healing would take time. But in this moment, in the quiet of the night, she could begin to see a glimmer of hope. "I'm glad we're here," Emily said quietly, looking around at her mom and Steve. They both turned to her, surprise flickering in their eyes. "I know we have a long way to go," Emily continued, her voice stronger now. "But maybe this is the first step. A chance to start over, even if it's just a little bit." Her mom smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "It's a good first step, sweetheart." Steve gave a small, hopeful nod. "Yeah, a good first step." And as they sat together, watching the fire flicker and dance, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, the possibility of change. Maybe it wasn't the solution to everything, but it was a beginning. And that was enough. The next few days passed slowly, but something had shifted in the air. Emily could feel it, the change, subtle but real. The tension between her and Steve hadn't disappeared, not by a long shot. But it had softened, just enough to make things feel bearable. There were moments of quiet, genuine conversation, and moments of silence that didn't feel as awkward as before. She was still wrestling with her emotions, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't carrying them alone. Emily had been giving herself time to process everything. The trip had begun to feel less like a forced attempt at reconciliation and more like a chance to just breathe, to take a step back from the chaos of her life. The mornings were calm, filled with walks in the woods, and the evenings, though often quiet, were filled with moments of connection. Steve's efforts were more visible, his small acts of kindness, doing the dishes, offering to take the trash out, or just sitting with her, meant more than she cared to admit. But despite all of this, Emily still found herself at a crossroads. Could she really move past everything that had happened between them? Could she ever trust Steve fully again? Her mind bounced between wanting to forgive him, wanting to see the good in him, and the reality that, deep down, she wasn't sure she could ever forget. She wasn't sure if she was even ready to try. One afternoon, after a long hike through the woods, Emily and her mom sat on the porch of the cabin, looking out at the sunset. The sky was painted in brilliant hues of pink, orange, and purple, the colors reflected in the still surface of the lake nearby. The silence between them was comfortable, but Emily could feel the familiar weight of unspoken words. "How are you really doing, honey?" her mom asked, breaking the quiet. Emily sighed, running her hand through her hair. I don't know, Mom. I keep thinking that maybe I'm just fooling myself into thinking everything will work out. Like maybe things aren't supposed to go back to the way they were before. Maybe that's just wishful thinking. Her mom nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. It's okay to feel that way. There's no rulebook for this kind of thing. We can't just erase the past. But we can choose what to do with it. You don't have to figure it all out right now. Emily leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The sky was changing, the colors shifting as the sun dipped lower. Everything felt so peaceful, so still, and yet her mind was anything but. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much she had been holding on to. Not just the anger or the hurt, but also the expectations. The idea of what their family was supposed to be. And now, that idea was slipping away. I think I'm just scared, Emily said, her voice small, almost lost in the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. I'm scared that if I let myself believe it could be different, I'll be let down again. That maybe we're just too broken. Her mom reached over, placing a hand on hers, offering the kind of comfort that only a mother could. Sweetheart, I get it. I'm scared too. But we can't live in fear of what might happen. We have to face it. Sometimes, that means taking a chance. And it's okay if you don't know the answer right away. What matters is that you're allowing yourself the space to feel it, to figure it out. That's a good start. Emily turned to her mom, her eyes a little watery but filled with gratitude. Thanks, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you. Her mom smiled softly, squeezing her hand. You'll never have to find out. As the evening fell and the stars began to twinkle in the clear sky above, Emily realized something. She didn't have to have it all figured out right now. She didn't have to make some grand decision today. All she had to do was keep moving forward, taking it day by day, step by step. And maybe, in time, things would begin to feel more certain. Maybe the answers would come when she was ready for them. The next morning, after a quiet breakfast, Steve suggested they all take a boat out on the lake. It had been one of the planned activities for the trip, but until now, they hadn't gotten around to it. Emily wasn't sure if she was in the mood for more forced family bonding, but something about Steve's eagerness, the way he looked at her with a mixture of hope and uncertainty, made her want to say yes. I guess it could be fun, Emily said, her voice casual but with a hint of a smile. Why not? Her mom grinned, clearly relieved that Emily was willing to participate. Great. I think some time on the water will do us all some good. Soon enough, they were out on the lake, the boat gently rocking as they drifted in the middle. The sun was high in the sky now, the water sparkling like liquid glass, and Emily felt a momentary sense of peace wash over her. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, vast and open. It felt like there were no boundaries here, no limits to what could happen next. And for the first time in days, she felt the pull of something like hope. Steve sat at the front of the boat, steering it slowly in circles, while Emily and her mom sat together in the back. They talked about little things, books they were reading, movies they'd seen, plans for the rest of the day, but there was a lightness to the conversation that felt genuine. The awkward tension was gone, replaced by a tentative understanding. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was something. After a while, Emily stood up, walking to the edge of the boat to look out over the water. The breeze was cool against her face, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself just be. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to let go of all the pressure. The uncertainty, the fear of what might happen next. She was just here. In this moment, Emily, Steve called softly from the front of the boat. She turned to face him, surprised to hear his voice. He looked at her with an expression that was so sincere it took her off guard. I know it's been hard, Steve said quietly, his tone steady. And I know I've made a lot of mistakes. But I want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I just want a chance to show you that I can be better. That we can figure this out together, if you'll let me. For a moment, Emily didn't know what to say. There were a million things running through her mind, things she wasn't sure she was ready to voice. But in that moment, standing on the boat, looking at Steve, really looking at him, she realized something important. She didn't have to know everything. She didn't have to have all the answers. But maybe, just maybe, she could give him a chance to prove that things could be different. She could take that first step, as scary as it was. "I'm not saying it's going to be easy," Emily said, her voice soft but steady. "But I'll try. I'll try if you will." Steve's face softened into a relieved smile. "I'll try. I promise." And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt like maybe, just maybe, the future didn't look so uncertain after all. The days that followed felt like they were both fast and slow at the same time. Emily had agreed to try, and so had Steve. It wasn't a promise that everything would go back to normal or that their relationship would heal overnight, but it was a start. Each day felt like a quiet negotiation, a push and pull between hope and uncertainty. Emily still didn't know how to feel. Every time she thought she was taking a step forward, she'd be reminded of the past, the hurt, the betrayal. And that wall she'd spent so much time building between herself and Steve would seem to grow just a little taller. But she was trying. That was the best she could do. One evening, after dinner, her mom suggested a walk around the lake. The air was cool but pleasant, and Emily was thankful for the chance to clear her mind. She and her mom walked side by side, with Steve trailing a few steps behind them. It was a peaceful walk, one that didn't need words to make it meaningful. Emily felt a quiet sense of peace as they moved along the shore, the gentle sound of the water lapping against the rocks adding to the calm atmosphere. Her mom, as always, was perceptive. She could tell when something was weighing heavily on Emily's mind, even if her daughter didn't say a word. After a few moments, she gently nudged her. "How are you really feeling, Emily?" she asked, her voice soft, as if she were afraid of disrupting the serenity of the moment. Emily hesitated. She didn't want to admit it, but there was something in her chest, an ache that hadn't gone away. "I don't know, Mom," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm trying, but it's so hard to let go of everything, you know? I want to trust Steve again, but I keep waiting for something to go wrong. And I'm scared it will." Her mom nodded, understanding completely. "Trust is a fragile thing, sweetheart. It takes time to rebuild, and sometimes it feels like it's never going to happen. But that doesn't mean you can't try. And even if it doesn't happen the way you expect, it doesn't mean you failed." Emily looked at her mom, her heart heavy but also comforted by the wisdom in her words. "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive him, but I want to believe that he's trying, that I'm not just setting myself up for more hurt." Her mom smiled gently, her eyes filled with compassion. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, but you're allowing yourself to take that chance. And that's what matters. No one expects you to forget the past or pretend it never happened. But you're choosing to move forward, one step at a time." Emily nodded, letting her mother's words sink in. The walk continued in comfortable silence, the sounds of nature around them adding to the peace she was beginning to find. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a while, she felt a little lighter. Maybe the burden of the past didn't have to dictate her future. The next day, Emily found herself alone in the cabin while her mom and Steve went out to run some errands. It wasn't unusual for her to have some time to herself, but today she felt an odd sense of anticipation, as if something was about to change. She spent the time cleaning up the cabin, tidying the kitchen, and picking up the small messes they'd left behind. As she moved around, her mind drifted back to the conversation with her mom. About trust. About forgiveness. Emily knew she wasn't ready to give Steve her whole heart again, but she couldn't deny that there was something different in the air. It wasn't just her trying to push forward. It was Steve's genuine attempts to be better, to show her that he cared. And yet, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As she washed the dishes, she noticed a small envelope sitting on the counter. She hadn't seen it there before. It was plain, unmarked, except for a faint crease in the corner. Curiosity tugged at her, and without thinking, she picked it up. The envelope was addressed to her mom. She turned it over in her hands, unsure of what to do. She wasn't the type of person to snoop, but something about the way the envelope looked so out of place made her hesitate. There was no return address, no note or explanation. Just the name written in neat handwriting. It could have been anything. It could have been from someone from her mom's past, from a friend, a family member. But the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right wouldn't leave her. What could it be? Why was it left here, on the kitchen counter? Against her better judgment, Emily carefully slid her finger under the flap of the envelope, her heart beating faster than it should have been. The envelope contained a single letter written on a sheet of thick, white paper. She unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the words. "I'm sorry for what you've gone through. But I want you to know it wasn't me. I didn't do this. And I'll do whatever it takes to prove it to you." The letter was signed only with the initial S. Emily's breath caught in her throat as the words sank in. Her heart raced. There was no doubt now. This letter had to be from Steve. It made no sense. What was he apologizing for? And why keep it hidden like this? Why wasn't he telling her directly? Her mind raced as she read the letter again. "I didn't do this. I'll do whatever it takes." What was he confessing to? What had he done? And why had he left the letter for her mom, hidden in such an odd place? She felt a cold wave of confusion and dread wash over her. The situation was already complicated enough, but this added a layer of mystery that she wasn't sure she was ready for. Before she could contemplate it further, the sound of the car pulling into the driveway snapped her out of her thoughts. Emily quickly stuffed the letter back into the envelope and set it down, pretending like nothing had happened. But the unease lingered. She didn't know it yet, but this letter was the beginning of something much bigger. A truth that would shake everything she thought she knew, and one that would test her ability to trust, not only Steve, but herself. Later that evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Emily tried her best to act normal. But the letter was still on her mind, gnawing at her thoughts. It felt like a time bomb, one that was counting down, ready to explode. She glanced over at Steve, who seemed relaxed, almost too relaxed. He didn't know that she had read the letter, didn't know that she knew something wasn't right. The calmness in his eyes only made the anxiety inside her grow. What was he hiding? What was he apologizing for? As they ate, the conversation moved in and out of topics, but Emily couldn't focus on anything but that letter. The unanswered questions, the doubts, it all swirled inside her, threatening to spill out. When the meal ended, Steve offered to clean up, a gesture he had started making in an attempt to show Emily he was committed to changing. Emily stood up to leave, but she hesitated. Something in her was urging her to ask, to confront him, but another part of her held her back. Instead, she simply excused herself and went to her room. But deep down, she knew she couldn't ignore the letter for long. Something was wrong. And whatever it was, Emily was about to uncover it. The night felt longer than it should have. Emily lay in her bed, the unease in her chest growing with every passing minute. The letter was a constant echo in her mind, replaying over and over, each word gnawing at her thoughts. "It wasn't me," it said. "I didn't do this." The cryptic words only deepened the mystery, and the more she thought about it, the more unsettled she became. What had Steve done? What was he apologizing for? The moonlight spilled through the window, casting long shadows across the room. Emily tossed and turned, but no matter how much she tried to ignore it, she knew she couldn't sleep. She had to confront him. She had to know the truth. A part of her wanted to forget the letter altogether, to let it slip into the past where it belonged. But the rest of her, the part that couldn't shake the nagging feeling in her gut, knew that wouldn't be possible. She wasn't going to get any peace until she confronted Steve about it. She could hear her mom and Steve talking softly in the other room, their voices muffled, though the occasional laugh or murmur filtered through the walls. Emily took a deep breath and swung her legs over the side of the bed, her feet meeting the cool wooden floor. She couldn't wait anymore. She had to do something. Slowly, she walked to the door and opened it, careful not to make a sound. She padded down the hallway, her heart beating faster with every step. She reached the living room, where Steve was sitting on the couch, his eyes focused on the television, though Emily knew he wasn't really watching. His mind was elsewhere. Her breath caught in her throat as she stood there for a moment, trying to steady herself. She had to be direct, had to ask him what the letter meant. If he truly was trying to rebuild trust, he couldn't keep hiding things from her. She wasn't going to let it slide this time. "Steve," she called out, her voice shaky but firm. He looked up at her in surprise, a flicker of tension crossing his face when he saw the expression in her eyes. He must have known something was off. "Hey, Emily. What's up?" he asked, his tone casual, though she could hear the hint of nervousness in his voice. She crossed her arms, standing in the doorway, unwilling to sit down just yet. The letter felt like a wall between them, something that could no longer be ignored. "I need to talk to you about something," she said, trying to sound calm, though inside, her heart was pounding. Steve's gaze shifted uncomfortably. "Sure. What's on your mind?" Emily took a deep breath, the words hanging heavily in the air. "I found a letter today. A letter that was meant for Mom. It was from you." Steve's expression faltered, his gaze darting away for a brief second before meeting her eyes again. There was a hesitation there, and Emily could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to figure out how to respond. "Look, Emily," he started, but she cut him off before he could go any further. "You said in that letter that you didn't do something," she continued, her voice growing more confident, though it was still tinged with confusion and hurt. "You said I didn't do this. What does that mean, Steve? What were you apologizing for?" The silence in the room was deafening. Steve shifted uncomfortably, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. His eyes flitted to the floor, then back up at her. He looked like a man caught between guilt and the desire to protect himself. "Emily, He began again, his voice tight. He sighed heavily. "It's not what you think. But I'm not sure I can explain it all right now. It's complicated." "Complicated?" Emily repeated, disbelief rising in her chest. "I found a letter in the cabin, and it sounds like you've been hiding something from us." "From Mom? And you're telling me it's complicated? If you want us to trust you again, you need to stop hiding things. You need to tell me the truth. Now." Steve stood up abruptly, running a hand through his hair in frustration. He walked to the window, staring out into the dark night as if the answer was somewhere out there. Emily felt the tension in the room, the air thick with unspoken truths. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone, Emily," Steve said quietly, his voice strained. "And I've made mistakes. But I swear I'm trying to fix things. The letter, it was meant for your mom, but I didn't know how to say it to her. I didn't know how to explain everything I've done. I've been trying to change, to be better." "But what did you do?" Emily asked, her voice rising slightly in frustration. "What's so bad that you can't tell us?" Steve turned back toward her, his face lined with exhaustion. "It's not that I don't want to tell you. It's just, I don't want to hurt your mom. I don't want to make things worse. I've already hurt enough people." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight, pressing down on Emily's chest. She wasn't sure what he meant by that. What could be so bad that he felt like telling her mom would make it worse? It was like Steve was speaking in riddles, and it was making her feel more lost with each passing moment. "Steve, please," Emily said, her voice softening, though the pain in her chest was still there. "If you want us to believe you, you have to start being honest. I'm not going to be a part of this mess anymore if you keep hiding things from us. You have to tell me what happened." Steve exhaled sharply, as if the weight of the world had just come crashing down on him. He leaned against the wall, looking at the floor for a long moment. Then, he raised his eyes to meet hers, and in them, Emily saw something she hadn't expected: regret. True regret. "I made a terrible decision, Emily," Steve said, his voice barely above a whisper. "One that has haunted me ever since. And I'm sorry for it." "I'm so sorry. But if I tell your mom everything, I fear it might be the final straw. And I don't want to lose her. I can't lose her." Emily stood still, processing his words. There was a deep pain in Steve's voice, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. And yet, something still didn't feel right. If he really wanted to fix things, why hadn't he been honest with her from the start? "Then tell me what you did, Steve," Emily said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm not asking for an excuse. I'm asking for the truth." Steve hesitated, his gaze dropping once again. He looked defeated, as if the weight of his secrets had finally caught up to him. "I will. But not tonight. Not until I'm ready to tell your mom too. I'm just not sure if it's the right time." Emily's heart sank. She had been hoping for a different answer. She wanted answers now, not later. But the uncertainty in Steve's voice left her wondering if he was ever going to be ready to tell the truth. "Okay," Emily said, the anger rising in her chest. "But don't think this is going to be easy. We can't keep doing this, Steve. You can't keep hiding things from us." Steve nodded, though the guilt in his eyes remained. I know. Emily turned away, her chest tight with frustration. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear: the road to rebuilding trust was going to be a long one. And maybe, just maybe, that road would lead to more heartbreak. The following days passed in a quiet fog. Emily couldn't escape the feeling that she was standing at the edge of a precipice, waiting for something or someone to push her off. Steve had promised to come clean, but Emily was beginning to wonder if that would ever happen. The uncertainty was killing her, piece by piece, as each moment felt like a countdown to something inevitable. She spent more time walking around the cabin, trying to clear her mind. The landscape was breathtaking, as it always had been: the stillness of the lake, the towering trees, the mountains looming in the distance, but none of it seemed to help. The beauty of the place only seemed to highlight the turmoil brewing inside her. It had been a week since the confrontation with Steve. He had kept his word, at least in part. He hadn't said a word more about the letter, about the secrets he was holding. But the tension between them was palpable. Emily could feel it every time he looked at her, every time their eyes met briefly before he quickly looked away. The silence was suffocating, and Emily didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending that everything was fine. It wasn't. The weight of the unspoken truth hung over them like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. Emily had tried to talk to her mom about it, but every time she brought it up, her mom would change the subject or tell her that Steve just needed time. Emily hated hearing that. It felt like an excuse. Time. What did that even mean? How much time would it take for Steve to finally face the music? On a Friday afternoon, Emily decided to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't wait any longer. She needed answers, and she wasn't going to stop until she got them. It was late in the afternoon when she found Steve sitting on the porch, staring out at the lake. The golden light of the setting sun bathed the scene in a soft glow, but Emily wasn't fooled by the tranquility. She approached him quietly, her mind made up. "Steve," she called, her voice steady but firm. He turned toward her, his face a mixture of surprise and resignation. "Emily," he said, standing up slowly. "What's going on?" She didn't waste any time. "We need to talk. Now." Steve sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't think we should do this right now." Emily's frustration bubbled to the surface. "Why not? You said you would tell me the truth, but all you've done is avoid me. You've been avoiding Mom, too. What are you so afraid of, Steve? Just tell me what you've done." I can't keep pretending that I don't know something is wrong. I found the letter. I know something happened. Steve's expression darkened, and for a moment, Emily thought he might walk away, but instead, he stayed rooted to the spot, his shoulders tense. The silence between them was thick with unresolved emotion. I never meant for things to get so complicated, Steve finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. You have to understand, Emily, I didn't want to hurt anyone. But what I did, it was a mistake. A huge mistake. Emily stood there, waiting. This was it. The moment when he would finally tell her everything. She took a deep breath, her pulse racing in anticipation. Just tell me what you did, Steve, she urged. Please. Steve looked at her, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher, regret, guilt, but also fear. It's not just about me, Emily. It's about your mom, too. She doesn't know everything, and I'm not sure how she'll handle it. I've been trying to protect her from the truth. But the truth is, I was involved in something that I shouldn't have been. Something that could ruin everything. Emily felt her stomach twist. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the cryptic words Steve had just said. What do you mean, something that could ruin everything? Steve hesitated, his eyes darting to the ground before meeting hers again. I made a bad decision when I was younger. A decision that ended up hurting a lot of people, including your mom. And when she found out, it caused a lot of problems. I was involved in a financial mess. Your mom didn't know about it. She still doesn't know the full extent of it. The air seemed to leave Emily's lungs as the weight of his words hit her. A financial mess, she repeated, trying to make sense of it. What kind of mess? Steve's face darkened further, his eyes pained. I was involved with some bad people. I got caught up in a scam. A big one. And when your mom and I met, I didn't tell her about it. I kept it hidden. I thought it would never come back to haunt me, but it did. And when it did, it caused problems. For her, for us. I was trying to keep everything together, but the more I lied, the worse it got. Emily could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had always known that Steve wasn't perfect, but this was something far bigger than she had imagined. She felt her legs go weak, and for a moment, she had to steady herself against the porch railing. You lied to Mom about that? For all this time, Steve nodded, his face a mask of regret. I didn't know how to tell her. I thought if I kept it hidden, it would just go away. But it didn't. And now I'm paying the price for it. And I'm sorry. I know I've hurt her. I've hurt you. And I don't know how to fix it. The words hung in the air, and Emily felt a mixture of anger and disbelief rising inside her. She had always trusted Steve, always believed in him. But this was a betrayal of a different kind. He had kept such a huge part of his life from them, and it had affected everything, her mom's life, their relationship, her entire perception of who he was. You've been hiding this for years, Steve, Emily said, her voice trembling with emotion. And you think you can just fix it now? Do you even realize how much damage this has caused? You've been lying to us both, pretending everything was fine while you were hiding this huge secret. What do you expect me to do with this information? How do I even process it? It had been a week since the confrontation with Steve. He had kept his word, at least in part. He hadn't said a word more about the letter, about the secrets he was holding. But the tension between them was palpable. Emily could feel it every time he looked at her, every time their eyes met briefly before he quickly looked away. The silence was suffocating, and Emily didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending that everything was fine. It wasn't. The weight of the unspoken truth hung over them like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. Emily had tried to talk to her mom about it, but every time she brought it up, her mom would change the subject or tell her that Steve just needed time. Emily hated hearing that. It felt like an excuse. Time. What did that even mean? How much time would it take for Steve to finally face the music? On a Friday afternoon, Emily decided to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't wait any longer. She needed answers, and she wasn't going to stop until she got them. It was late in the afternoon when she found Steve sitting on the porch, staring out at the lake. The golden light of the setting sun bathed the scene in a soft glow, but Emily wasn't fooled by the tranquility. She approached him quietly, her mind made up. "Steve," she called, her voice steady but firm. He turned toward her, his face a mixture of surprise and resignation. "Emily," he said, standing up slowly. "What's going on?" She didn't waste any time. "We need to talk. Now." Steve sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't think we should do this right now." Emily's frustration bubbled to the surface. "Why not? You said you would tell me the truth, but all you've done is avoid me. You've been avoiding Mom, too. What are you so afraid of, Steve? Just tell me what you've done." "I can't keep pretending that I don't know something is wrong. I found the letter. I know something happened." Steve's expression darkened, and for a moment, Emily thought he might walk away, but instead, he stayed rooted to the spot, his shoulders tense. The silence between them was thick with unresolved emotion. "I never meant for things to get so complicated," Steve finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have to understand, Emily, I didn't want to hurt anyone. But what I did, it was a mistake. A huge mistake." Emily stood there, waiting. This was it. The moment when he would finally tell her everything. She took a deep breath, her pulse racing in anticipation. "Just tell me what you did, Steve," she urged. "Please." Her mom entered the room, a smile on her face as she walked in from the living room. "Hey, how's it going? How are you feeling?" Her mom's voice was warm, caring, but there was something in her eyes, something that suggested she knew there was more to the story than Emily had let on. "I'm okay," Emily replied, her voice a little too tight, a little too unsure. She turned to face her mom, taking a deep breath. "Actually, no, I'm not. I need to talk to you about something. Something really important." Her mom's expression shifted, concern overtaking her smile. "Of course. What's going on?" Emily set her cup down and looked her mom in the eyes. "It's about Steve. I know he's been hiding something from you, from both of us. And I think it's time you knew the truth." Her mom's eyes widened slightly, her hands stilling in midair, as if she had been reaching for something on the counter. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She couldn't take this back now. The words had already left her mouth. "I found a letter, Mom. It was from Steve. And it had some things in it that didn't make sense at first. But after talking to him, I found out that he's been hiding something huge from you. Something from his past." Her mom's face paled, and she took a step back. "What? What are you saying, Emily?" "I don't know all the details," Emily continued, trying to gather the courage to say it. "But Steve got involved in something, a financial scam when he was younger. And he didn't tell you about it. He kept it from you. He thought he could protect you from the truth, but it's been eating away at him. And it's been eating away at me too. I don't want to keep this secret anymore." Her mom's face was unreadable, her lips pressed into a thin line. Emily could see her mom's mind racing, trying to process what she had just said. The silence between them was heavy, as if the very air had thickened with the weight of the revelation. You're saying that Steve was involved in something like that?" her mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "All this time?" Emily nodded. "Yes, he's been hiding it from you. And I know it's a lot to take in, but I think you need to hear it from him. He needs to be honest with you, Mom." Her mom took a step back, putting her hands on the counter as if trying to steady herself. I don't know what to say," she murmured, shaking her head. "I don't know what to think." "Mom, please," Emily said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm not trying to hurt you. I don't want you to be kept in the dark anymore. You deserve to know everything. You deserve the truth." Her mom didn't respond right away. She just stood there, staring blankly at the countertop, her mind clearly grappling with what Emily had just said. The weight of the silence in the room was almost unbearable. Emily had known that this conversation would be hard, but she hadn't expected it to feel like this. She hadn't expected the devastation to be written so plainly on her mom's face. After what felt like an eternity, her mom looked up at her, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know what to say," she repeated, her voice barely audible. "I feel betrayed. I feel like everything I've known about him, about us, has been a lie." Emily's heart broke at the sound of her mom's voice. She knew this wasn't easy. It wasn't easy for her either. But she had to be the one to say it. She had to help her mom understand. "Mom, I know this is a lot. And I know you're hurting right now. But Steve, he didn't mean for any of this to happen. He made a mistake. A huge one. But he's been trying to fix it, and he wants to make things right with you. He's been hiding it because he was scared. He was scared of losing you. Scared that it would destroy everything." Her mom didn't answer right away. She just looked at her, her face a mix of confusion, hurt, and disbelief. Emily could tell that her mom was processing the information, trying to reconcile the man she had loved with the man who had been hiding such a huge secret from her. "I don't know if I can forgive him," her mom finally said, her voice raw with emotion. "I don't know if I can just forget everything he's kept from me." Emily stepped closer, her heart aching for her mom. "I don't expect you to forgive him right away. I know it's going to take time. But I just think you need to hear the truth from him. He's ready to talk. He's ready to face it all." Her mom nodded slowly, her eyes still glassy with tears. "I don't know what's going to happen, Emily. I don't know if this will break us or make us stronger. But I need to talk to him. I need to hear it from him." Emily nodded, relief flooding through her. "I think that's the first step, Mom. The truth is out there now. And whatever happens next, we'll face it together." The road ahead was uncertain, filled with more questions than answers. But for the first time in a long time, Emily felt like they had crossed a threshold. They couldn't go back to pretending anymore. The truth had been laid bare, and now it was up to them to figure out what came next. The following morning, the air felt thick with anticipation. The weight of yesterday's conversation still hung over the house, an invisible presence that neither Emily nor her mom could quite shake off. Emily had never seen her mom so distant, so lost in thought. Even when she tried to engage in casual conversation, there was a wall between them, a gap that neither knew how to bridge. Emily sat in the living room, her mind racing. She had done what she could to prepare her mom for the truth, but now everything was out of her hands. The conversation with Steve was inevitable. She had already given him a chance to come clean, and now her mom was ready to hear it. But would it change everything? Could they ever go back to how things were before? Emily wasn't sure. But what she did know was that the truth, no matter how painful, was always better than living in the shadows of lies. Around noon, Steve finally emerged from the guest room, looking worn and weary. His face, usually confident and composed, was now etched with the lines of someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. He glanced at Emily briefly before looking over at her mom, who was sitting quietly at the kitchen table, lost in thought. Steve took a deep breath, then made his way to the kitchen. Emily watched as he approached her mom, his steps hesitant, uncertain. She couldn't help but feel a knot form in her stomach. This was it. This was the moment of reckoning. Her mom didn't look up immediately, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her posture rigid. Steve stopped a few feet away from her, standing silently for a moment, as if searching for the right words. The silence between them was thick with tension. Finally, Steve spoke, his voice low and raw. "I owe you an explanation, and I owe you the truth," he said, his words heavy with guilt. "I've kept so much from you, things that you deserve to know. Things that I should have told you a long time ago. But I was afraid. Afraid of losing you. And I see now how much damage that fear has caused. Her mom didn't respond right away, but Emily could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was holding herself back. She was holding her breath, as if waiting for Steve to say something more, something that would give her the clarity she needed. Steve continued, his voice shaking slightly. I was involved in a scam years ago. I got caught up in something that I couldn't get out of. And when I met you, I didn't tell you about it. I thought if I kept it hidden, I could protect you and everything we built together. But I was wrong. And now I'm here, ready to face what I've done. Her mom's eyes flickered toward him, her face unreadable. You lied to me, she said, her voice low, but there was no anger in it. Not yet. Just hurt. For all these years. You kept this from me. Steve nodded, his face filled with regret. I know. And I don't expect you to forgive me just like that. I've made a mess of everything and I don't know how to fix it, but I need you to know the truth. I was trying to protect you, but in doing so, I pushed you further away. The silence stretched on as her mom processed his words. Emily held her breath, watching her mom carefully, waiting for some sign of what she was thinking. Her mom's face remained impassive, but Emily could see the tightness in her jaw, the way her fists were clenched. Finally, her mom stood up, slowly, her eyes still locked on Steve. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know if I can ever forget what you've kept from me, but you're right about one thing, we've built something together. And that's not something I'm ready to throw away just yet. Steve's expression softened, though the weight of his past mistakes still hung over him. I understand. I know I've lost your trust, and I'll do whatever it takes to earn it back. I don't expect you to just move past this, but I want to try. I want to make it right. Her mom took a step forward, her eyes searching his. You've hurt me, Steve. You've hurt us both. And it's going to take time. A lot of time. Steve nodded. I know. And I'm willing to do the work. Whatever it takes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air was heavy with the weight of the past, but there was something else there, too, something small, fragile, and tentative. It was the beginning of something new. A chance for healing. A chance to rebuild what had been broken. Emily couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It wasn't the end of everything, but it was the beginning of something different. Something that, for the first time, felt like it might actually work. Her mom finally exhaled, her shoulders sagging with the weight of the conversation. I don't know what comes next, she said quietly. But I know I can't go back to how things were before. I need to think about this. I need time. Steve nodded again, his voice full of understanding. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. I'll be waiting. And I'll keep trying to make it right. Emily watched as her mom left the room, retreating into the solitude of her thoughts. She didn't know what to expect from this moment. She didn't know if things would ever go back to normal. But she knew one thing for certain. This was the start of a new chapter. A chapter that would require patience, understanding, and perhaps forgiveness. Steve sat down at the table, his face tired, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Determination. Regret. But also hope. He had finally faced the consequences of his actions, and while the road ahead would be long, Emily could see that he was ready to walk it. She stood in the doorway, looking at him, her thoughts running wild with the possibilities of what came next. The past was behind them now. The truth was out. And while they couldn't change what had happened, they could shape what came after. Are you okay? Steve asked softly, his voice breaking the silence. Emily hesitated before answering, her voice steady but full of emotion. I don't know yet, but I think we'll figure it out. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. And sometimes, that was enough. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?